From Kern Government Television, welcome to this week's Kern County Board of Supervisors meeting, originating from the County Administrative Center located at 1115 Truxtun Avenue, Bakersfield, California. Kern County's vision is to create and maintain a customer-centered county government designed to garner the confidence, support, and trust of the people we serve. Today's Kern County Board of Supervisors meeting will convene momentarily.
Good morning and welcome to the Tuesday, January 23rd meeting of the Kern County Board of Supervisors. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Supervisor Gleason.
Go Patriots.
I don't think my mic is on.
Mine isn't either.
It's not touching. Okay, hang on. There we go.
I might have messed that up.
Way to go, Mike.
Now we're ready. Supervisor Gleason.
Go Patriots.
Supervisor Scribner. Supervisor Maggard.
Here.
Supervisor Couch.
Here.
Supervisor Perez. Here.
Good morning. We are going to begin our morning with a salute to the flag, and then we will follow that with a moment, as you please remain standing for a moment of prayer, meditation, or silence. We're going to have our flag salute led this morning by Diana Cisneros. Thank you for doing that, Ms. Cisneros. She is with the Kern Coalition Against Human Trafficking, and she's the Training and Outreach Coordinator. Thank you.
Salute. Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please be seated. We're going to begin our morning by looking at our consent agenda. There are copies of the agenda, by the way, as you come in through the glass doors into the room. There are some tables just inside those doors, and you can pick up a copy there if you'd like a copy of our agenda. Excuse me. So we'll begin with our consent agenda. All items listed with a CA. First, I'm going to read off the consent items, and then I'll come back and read that. Beginning on page 2 of this morning's agenda, item 2, then items 6 and 7. On page 3, items 9 through 15. On page 4, items 16 and 18, and then 20 through 23. On page 5, items 24 through 28, and then items 30 through 32. On page 6, all items 33 through 41. On page 7, item 42, and then items 44 through 48. Excuse me. All those items are designated with a CA. All items listed with a CA are considered to be routine and non-controversial by county staff. Consent items will be considered first and may be approved by one motion. If a member of the audience wishes to comment or ask questions regarding an item or items on the consent agenda, a member of the board may remove an item from the consent agenda, and it will be considered in a listed sequence with an opportunity for any member of the public to address the board concerning the item before the action is taken. Are there any members of the public that would like to make comment to us this morning about any item on consent? Yes, sir. Good morning. Could you please give us your name for the record and proceed?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to address your honorable board. It's been some years since I've been able to do that.
Thank you, sir.
My name is Jerry Starr, S-T-A-R-R. I am with the Westside Healthcare District in Taft. My address is 119 Atkinson Way in Taft. I am in reference to consent agenda item number 41, and I wish to express the appreciation on behalf of the Board of Directors of the Westside Healthcare District to Supervisor Couch, his assistant Ryan Schultz, the Department of Public Health, and especially Chris Neiswanger, for their support in locating a disaster preparedness medical supply cache in the west side of Kern County. We are completing this project with the financial assistance and the cooperation of the County of Kern and the City of Taft, and the collaboration with the district to support the citizens of the west side is sincerely appreciated. I appreciate that. Thank you for the opportunity to address your honorable board.
Mr. Starr, thank you for the kind words. Mr. Supervisor Couch, would you like to say anything?
Jerry, I just want to thank you for being here, and it's an honor to work with you. I appreciate it.
Much appreciated. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Would any other members of the board, of the public like to make any comment about any item on consent? How about members of the board? Is there a motion on consent then?
So moved.
Second.
And a second. Thank you. Please cast your votes.
The motion is approved. 4 ayes, 1 absent. Supervisor Scribner.
Thank you very much. We have a presentation of a proclamation this morning declaring January 2018 as Human Trafficking Awareness Month in Kern County, and Supervisor Couch is going to make that presentation.
Motion on the proclamation.
Please cast your votes.
Motion is approved. 4 ayes, 1 absent. Supervisor Scribner.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. We can all agree that public safety is our top priority. One area of public safety that is often overlooked is human trafficking. The International Labor Organization estimates, stick with me, I'm going to get these syllables right here in just a moment, that there are 20.9 million victims of human trafficking globally. 68% are trapped in forced labor, 26% are children, and 55% are women and young girls. The U.S. Department of Labor has identified 139 goods from 75 countries made by forced and child labor. Now, those are pretty staggering statistics. We don't think about it maybe every day, but I am honored to be before you today to proclaim this month of January as Human Trafficking Awareness Month and present this Board of Supervisors proclamation to representatives here from the Kern Coalition Against Human Trafficking. I'm going to read the proclamation, and I'll present this to Diana Cisneros, who just a moment ago did led us in the flag salute. Proclamation reads, the Board of Supervisors of the County of Kern, State of California, has officially proclaimed January 2018 as Human Trafficking Awareness Month in Kern County, and this recognition has been entered into the official board minutes signed by our Honorable Chairman, Mike Maggard, stated today, January 23rd. Diana, would you like to say a couple words? Dustin, you going to do it?
Sorry. Good morning. Thank you, Supervisor Couch. First, I would like to talk about the Kern Coalition Human Trafficking, also known as KCAT, and how it became what it is today. Sorry, Dustin Contreras. In 2012, a handful of advocates, a law enforcement officer, and average people got together to form a coalition to work together to combat human trafficking in Kern County. Since that time, KCAT has grown and worked in partnership with over 50 non-government organizations, law enforcement, and community members to continue the fight against modern-day slavery. Presently, KCAT continues to grow and serve adult and minor victims of sex slavery and labor trafficking. I would now like to thank some of our partners who continue to support KCAT. To Melissa Gomez and Sarah Johnston, the Central Valley Freedom Coalition in Fresno. Your partnership as a sister coalition has made KCAT a stronger, more effective beacon of hope for victims and survivors in the San Joaquin region. The Kern County Department of Human Services has led the way in developing curriculum and protocols for social workers, advocates, and law enforcement to better understand the state of human trafficking in terms of commercially sexually exploited children. These include the most vulnerable members of our community, specifically children and at-risk youth. I would like to thank Vanessa Frando, Monique Hawkins, Aaron Gillespie, and all the CSEC staff at DHS for their hard work and commitment to end child sex slavery. I would also like to thank Louis Gill from the Alliance Against Family Violence and Sexual Assault, Carol Beecroft and Karen Stone from the Women's Center High Desert for their direct victim services their agencies provide. Thank you to Della Hodson of United Way of Kern for your guidance and support. Thank you to DK Fox and Carlos Bella with Golden Empire Transit for placing KCAT's anti-human trafficking posters in 90 of the buses that travel throughout Bakersfield. Thank you to Sheriff Youngblood and the Kern County Sheriff's Office, Chief Lyle Martin of Bakersfield Police Department, the California Highway Patrol, Homeland Security Investigations, the FBI, and all of other law enforcement agencies in Kern County who are on the ground as modern-day abolitionists, saving victims daily from their captors. To our faith-based community members, Canyon Hills Church, the Episcopalians, and the Catholic Diocese of Fresno, a big thank you for your support to the victims and survivors of these crimes against humanity. To our former director, Phil Gaisley, your hard work and legacy will live on forever in the hearts and minds of all those involved with KCAT. We wish you well in your continued anti-human trafficking efforts back home in England. And our biggest heartfelt gratitude goes out to the victims and survivors of human trafficking. You are the reason we do what we do. Your unrelenting courage gives us courage. Your story is our story. Finally, each one of you in this room has a power and influence in your personal and professional lives. Robert Kennedy had a saying, one person can make a difference and everyone should try. I ask all of you to make a difference in our county and challenge every person in this room and in this community to become more vigilant, alert, and aware. What is happening to the victims in Kern County is not just a law enforcement problem. It is an all of our problem. Every day, victims are rescued, and they are rescued because of unsung heroes, average people doing average things and simply paying attention. I heard the former CEO of the National Center of Missing Exploited Children, Ernie Allen, speak at a conference. He spoke of when NCMEC became what it is today. Then President Ronald Reagan spoke at the opening of the center. President Reagan used an old simple poem by Helen Cromer as a challenge to all of us. It goes like this: one man awake can awaken another. The second can awaken his next door brother. The three awake can rouse the town, turning the whole place upside down. And the many awake make such a fuss, they finally awaken the rest of us. All that we ask of everyone here today is small, simple favor. Help us wake up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Contreras, for making that presentation to us, and Supervisor Couch for highlighting the proclamation. We next offer an opportunity on our agenda for the public to make comment to us about any item that is, about any issue they would like that is not otherwise on our agenda. So if you're here this morning and you would like to make comment to us, we allow 2 minutes for each person to make a comment to us about anything that we're not otherwise already agendized to discuss this morning. So could you please give us your name for the record and proceed, sir?
Good morning. My name is David Abbasi, President of the Central Valley Cannabis Association. We were excited about the prospect of comprehensive regulations, cannabis regulations. However, the same group that had a monopoly under Measure G are at it again with Jimmy Yee and Kim Schaefer from the Realtors Association. Schaefer represents KCPR, which has dispensaries in both Bakersfield and Kern County. I know this because I was a member of KCPR. Kim said the group only has city interests, but that is far from the truth. The medical cannabis community is outraged that Supervisor Maggard hired Kim Schaefer as a political consultant before the cannabis vote. At the time, Kim Schaefer was actively working with Maggard to create a new Measure G, which privileged only her and Jimmy Yee's clients. Maggard, chairman of the board, hired Kim Schaefer, who is the subject of a corruption lawsuit that alleges she paid off members of the Board of Supervisors and Bakersfield City Council in conjunction with Jimmy Yee from Yankee Communications. She did it for the PACE vote, and now she's doing it for cannabis. On live radio, Supervisor Maggard lied about knowing Kim's cannabis connections. The truth is, she represents county dispensaries and Supervisor Mike Maggard. We knew what was going to happen next. Within days of leading the charge to ban cannabis, Maggard began to have, from his own live air comments, conversations to design regulations for a limited number of dispensaries. What I am putting on the record today is Maggard's connection to a notorious criminal drug trafficking organization in the cannabis business. I asked for help from federal investigators to end the real fraud being foisted on Kern County by Kim Schaefer, Jimmy Yee, Mike Maggard, and their high-powered dispensary owners that paid them, again, in exchange for a monopoly on cannabis in Kern County. Clerk of the board, I'd like to present you with copies of my statement to distribute amongst staff. Please, thank you.
Mr. Abbasi, your time has expired.
And thank you. Oh, and by the way, the list of 28 is no longer the same. We're watching, seeing who you put on that list.
Thank you, Mr. Abbasi, for your comments. Okay, any other members of the public would like to speak to us this morning? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. My name is Victor Kretzinger, K-R-E-T-S-I-N-G-E-R. I live in Oildale, and I think you're going to be discussing later about the pedestrian safety issue.
Yes, sir, we are.
And I have questions and statements. What's the problem?
Sir, when that item comes up this morning, we would love to have you comment
Oh.
in that discussion. So can you wait until that happens?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kretzinger. Is that how you said your name?
Yes, sir.
Kretzinger, thank you. Anyone else? Good morning, ma'am.
Morning.
Please give us your name for the record and tell us what you'd like.
It's Eliane Gifford.
Eliane Gifford. Good morning, Ms. Gifford.
I'm here on behalf of the fire department. I would like to request that the month of December 2017 be dedicated to the firemen. You know, you see them, you know, they like earth, wind, and fire. You know, they just take care of everything. And I just support. And I would like to have a voice of the vast silent majority. And for law enforcement, 13th month salary as a bonus paid every December around Christmas. I am from Brazil, and I'm an American citizen now, and I'm a retired federal employee. And we have the law in Brazil, and it was created for law enforcement and fire department because they are, you know, you've seen the Thomas fire.
Yeah.
You know, that wall of fire, and here's this man standing right there doesn't even know where to aim the water to because there's just so many spots. And they, you know, and of course, I like for them to be appreciated more for the work they do. It's, you know, earth, wind, and fire. They're not the fire department, they are everything department.
Thank you, ma'am. We appreciate you coming forward. Welcome to our country.
And I'd like to suggest that we do a fundraiser for the 13th month salary to be paid in December to law enforcement by creating a bumper sticker. Thank you, California firefighters.
Thank you, ma'am.
And sell it to the public, you know, give us a voice.
Okay, well, thank you, ma'am, for coming forward this morning. We join you in your gratitude to the fire department and first responders who helped so many people during that fire. And we thank them for their service as well. Thank you for your suggestions this morning.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak to us this morning about any matter not otherwise on our agenda? Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Maggard. Congratulations on your promotion.
Thank you.
My name is Nadine.
It's not really a promotion.
Oh, well, it seems like it. I feel like it is. You should be proud. My name is Nadine Escalante. I'm here to talk about this morning AQ, which is adaptability quotient. So I have some papers to pass out to, if the clerk, when she has a moment, can give them to all the board members. Thank you, I appreciate it. The scripture I'd like to share with you is from the book of Joel, and I hope that you guys can use the scripture all year long in all your thoughts and deeds and what you do. The scripture is this: change your life, not just your clothes. Go back to God, your God, and here's why. He's kind and merciful. He takes a deep breath, puts up with a lot, and this most patient God, extravagant in love and always ready to cancel catastrophe. I wish to address the board today about the topic of adaptability quotient. This is a new term to me. I didn't realize what it was. It means that we have the ability to adapt to environmental changes, and the the faster that we can adapt to those changes, it makes it more easier for us to get advanced in life. So I'm sure none of us in this room were born with perfect lives. And so the packet of paperwork I gave you is an example of some of the difficulties that I've gone through in my life. Issues with the county, being, adopted, putting in the foster care system. My first child almost considered dead at birth, and overcoming. These are life-changing incidents in my life, but I was able to overcome those. And I think that's something important that we as a county should look into this and using this into the county's business standpoint for the rest of this year, because as it talks about, there's a business plan, which is you see the problem, you own the problem, you solve the problem, and you do the problem. And as we see with the county, we have a lot of problems.
Ms. Escalante, your time has expired, so could you just bring it to a close when you get a chance?
We have a lot of problems. Please look up what this term means and look into using it into your guys' daily year this year. So thank you very much. Y'all have a good day.
Thank you, Ms. Escalante, for coming forward this morning. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak to us this morning about an item not otherwise on our agenda? Not seeing anyone, then we will close the public presentation portion of our agenda and move to board member announcements and reports. I believe Supervisor Perez, you have a referral or a comment this morning?
I do. Thank you, Chairman. I had a really encouraging meeting with Dominic Brown of KCERA yesterday, and I was stricken by his passion to really educate our workforce here at the county, and I hope beyond, about our retirement system, its coming changes, and how to think about really being more active, proactive in our retirement. Because Dominic is brilliant. This is his expertise as established over a lifetime, and I have a really tremendous respect for him. So I want to say thank you. Excuse me. I want to say thank you, Dominic, for caring so much about educating and empowering the county employees to understand the vastly complex nature of the retirement system and what are likely to be changes to the retirement system coming that I think folks would be so much better to know rather than just fear. So with that said, I would like to make a referral asking our CAO and KCERA to please work closely together to identify potential educational opportunities related to retirement to be presented to the Board of Supervisors and to county employees. I am very excited about this. CAO also, the empowerment of information and our security, our future, of course, will make us all feel better, more hopeful, and more committed to the work that we do. So I'm really excited about it, and I'm going to partner very strongly and make myself available to your office as well as KCERA to make sure this is a success and we disseminate that information successfully. So thank you.
Supervisor Perez, I was reminded by our clerk that in order for a referral to be scheduled on our schedule of referrals and tracked, we need to make a motion. So would you like to make a motion, and then we'll get a second?
I would. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I would. Thank you, Chairman.
I'll second it.
Thank you. All in favor, or please indicate your vote.
Please confirm your votes. Thank you. The motion is approved. 4 ayes, 1 absent. Supervisor Scrivener.
Thank you. I have a referral as well this morning. Our Director of Planning brought to my attention AB 1745, Lorelei Oviatt, and I had a conversation about this. And AB 1745 is a piece of legislation that has recently been introduced that will require that only zero-emission cars be sold and used, keyword there, used in California in the year 2040. That's 23 years from now. But there will be very significant consequences in the state's economy, and particularly to communities and counties such as Kern County. So I would like to refer this morning to Ms. Oviatt, the referral for us to undertake a process where we can do an economic study and land use of this economic and do a study of the economic and land use implications upon the general fund and the impacts upon the public and our communities for AB 1745. And if I would appreciate it if somebody would make a motion to that effect, and then we'll begin a process to become educated about this, and she can come report to us what direction she thinks we should go and how we should go about doing it.
So moved.
Thank you. Supervisor Gleason?
Second.
Thank you, Supervisor Perez. Please cast your votes.
The motion is approved, 4 ayes, 1 absent. Supervisor Scrivener.
Very good. Are there any other members of the board that would like to make comment this morning? Okay, then let's move on down then to item number 5 under the category of airports. That is our airport director, Richard Strickland, is with us. He's going to give us a report on runway 12 left, 30 right rehabilitation project at Meadows Field.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Board of Supervisors. Pleasure to be here this morning. This is the 11th update on your main runway project, and some exciting things happening out there. I know that several of you had a chance over the last couple of months to come out there and tour the airfield and see what was going on, and I appreciate that. For phase 2, for the runway rehabilitation, we did complete the 3,400 feet of the runway, the approach lighting system, the edge lighting system, new replacement and connector taxiways, the touchdown zones. But in doing so, we had a couple of discoveries out there. We found some old oil lines that are quite ancient, that were in the way of being able to set the correct grades per the FAA 13A standards that we're following. And in doing so, we also came across 6 more oil lines at the southern end that are all affecting the ability of the project. In finding these wonderful challenges out there, we were able to get those oil lines removed up to taxiway alpha. That was critical in being able to set the grades between your main runway and alpha, which is the main taxiway at Meadows Field. The oil lines continue to run underneath taxiway alpha. So while we were setting the grades and removing some 220,000 cubic yards of dirt, we do have to deal with the oil lines being under alpha. The reason for that is alpha's too high. It's about 13 feet too high. It doesn't allow for us to meet the standards that are out there by the FAA. In doing so, I've worked with the FAA over the last 4 months in order to put together an amendment, and we just completed an amendment a little over $300,000 beyond the value of the grant, 90% covered by the FAA. Completed the study, came up with 6 different options as to what we can do with taxiway alpha, and just completed meetings with the FAA on Monday, and we will be able to proceed forward now with the appropriate, about a $1.4 million grant to come up with the final design for the preferred option out of the 6 that we met with the FAA over. And it's really important so that way we can lower alpha down, get the airfield geometry where it should be, remove the rest of the oil lines from underneath alpha, and just wanted to keep your board updated as to the developments that are going on there as we go into phase 3 on the project.
Thank you, Mr. Strickland, for your report. Are there members of the board that want to make comment before we go to the public? Any members of the public wish to make comment about Mr. Strickland's report? Thank you. Board members?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Supervisor Gleason.
Thanks. So what's the alternate that was selected to repair taxiway alpha?
The design alternate that we've selected is a partial lowering of alpha after we remove the fuel lines, and then we'll look at how far we have to carry the grade and the slopes into the main ramp areas. And it'll take about 1 year to put that full design implemented together, but it'll be a 100% design package that we'll be able to bid out when we're complete with doing it.
Is taxiway alpha going to be closed while you're doing that work?
Taxiway alpha will be
long?
closed when we actually do the construction work.
For how long?
Probably about a 6-month window.
And what are we going to do for commercial traffic during the period when taxiway alpha is closed?
Much like we did with the main runway, we'll find a way to move the traffic around the airfield safely, and we'll phase the various component pieces of the project.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions regarding this item?
I'll move to receive and file.
Thank you. Is there a second to that?
Yep.
Please cast your votes.
The motion is approved, 4 ayes, 1 absent. Supervisor Scrivener.
Thank you. Next up is item number 8. This is from our assessor recorder, John Lifquist. Mr. Lifquist is coming to the microphone now. This is a request for a reduction in appropriation for unrealized revenue. Good morning, Mr. Lifquist.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. The assessor's office, after the budget was passed in August, realized that we are going to experiencing budget shortfall for our supplemental revenue. We've been dealing with this for quite a while. Ultimately, we have decided to eliminate 2 fiscal support technicians positions. This will result in 1 layoff. We are holding another position vacant, and we are using BSI to cover the rest of the shortfall.
Very good, Mr. Lifquist. Any questions from the public about this before we move to the board for comment? Colleagues, do you have any comment or questions, or would you like to? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry. Supervisor Perez.
Thank you, Chairman. John, thank you for coming around and explaining to us the logic and rationale behind this decision. I think it makes sense. It's prudent, and I appreciate you keeping the board informed on what are otherwise complicated matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor.
Any other comments or questions? Is there a motion then to approve and authorize the Auditor Controller to process the request?
So moved.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Please cast your votes.
The motion is approved, 4 ayes, 1 absent. Supervisor Scrivener.
Thank you, Mr. Lifquist, for the great job you do for us.
Thank you.
Moving down now to item number 17, we have a report from Employers Training Resource. This is an education and workforce development presentation, and I believe Teresa Hitchcock is going to make that for us. Good morning, Ms. Hitchcock.
Good morning, Chairman Maggard, members of the board. I am pleased to present yet another presentation for our Workforce Development Board. In August of 2017, your board requested monthly presentations on efforts in Kern County to prepare our workforce to be competitive in a global economy. Today, CSUB and Chevron are here to make a presentation regarding the Fab Lab project at CSUB's campus. The CSUB Fab Lab is a digital fabrication lab open to both students and the public. The facility features a variety of machines such as laser cutters, 3D printers, and vinyl cutters. The public is encouraged to stop by during open hours to learn more or to use the equipment. And with that, I would like to have CSUB and Chevron come up to make the presentation.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Thank you so much for having us today to talk about public-private partnerships. My name is Adam Alvidrez. I'm the Community Engagement Advisor for Chevron's Public Affairs Department right here in Bakersfield. We appreciate Romeo Agbalag from Kern Citizens for Sustainable Government for helping to facilitate this dialogue. We also have Dr. Kathleen Madden from CSUB, as well as Dr. Andrea Medina from CSUB, who you'll hear from in just a minute. What I wanted to do briefly is kind of set the stage and walk through a timeline briefly and where Chevron has been, where we're going, and all the exciting opportunities for the community. In 2010, Chevron Corporate came to us and asked us if we'd be interested in advancing and expanding STEM opportunities, science, technology, engineering, and math opportunities for students throughout Kern County, as well as the community in general. In other words, they asked us if we wanted to spend money, and we told them absolutely, please send it our way.
As you have many, many times before.
Right. So in general, we have invested millions of dollars right here in Kern County. We know there's a lot of untapped talent. Our kids are really smart. They don't have to go to Silicon Valley to have really cool high-tech jobs. It's right here in Kern County. So to complement that momentum and to highlight some of the partnerships that we've executed over the years, new to our portfolio in terms of investment is our partnership with CSU Bakersfield and the Fab Foundation. As staff mentioned, the Fab Lab is a really cool machine shop with a lot of high-tech gadgets where you can essentially make anything. And so to demonstrate that partnership and to walk through what it means for the community, I would like to invite Dr. Kathleen Madden.
Dr. Madden, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Adam, and also let me express my appreciation to the board. We're very thrilled to be here today to talk about our Fab Lab. We're very excited about what we're doing there, and so we'd love to have the chance to show it off. In the School of Natural Sciences, Mathematics, and Engineering, STEM outreach is something that we really feel is an important part of our mission, and the Fab Lab is one of the things that we do for outreach. I'm just going to mention 2 or 3 other things to give you a little bit of a sense. It's certainly not comprehensive, but to give you a sense of the variety of different things we're doing. We have a community preventative health cooperative, for example. This is something done by our nursing department where they bring nurses out into the community to give free health screenings and referrals, and you'll find them all over the place in Kern County, from homeless shelters to the fair. You never know where they're going to pop up. They're very active. We have a California Energy Research Center. This is a new initiative that we're super excited about. We just hired our first permanent director, and that center is working very hard to create collaborations and synergies between all the various energy industries that we have in Kern County and our faculty and our students, synergies that will be beneficial to both. We have all kinds of one-time events. In a few weeks, we're going to be having the Fab Fest, which is a celebration open to the whole community that celebrates the maker movement. We also have a variety of partnerships with Kern High School District, one of them being dual credit courses in geology and mathematics. So I could go on. We're doing a lot of things with STEM outreach. We feel like that's very important. The Fab Lab is maybe the crown jewel in our outreach efforts. We have so many things going on there, and we're very happy to be here today to talk about it. We're going to start by showing you just a very short, I think it's about a 1.5-minute video. And the video starts by just kind of talking about the Fab Lab and what's in the Fab Lab. And then it follows a group of students from Fruitvale Junior High School who are coming to the Fab Lab for a field trip. And to give you a little bit of context, the students are in Ms. Holly Sheldon's Project Lead the Way class at Fruitvale Junior High School. And in their class, they've been imagining and designing various different projects. And now they're showing up at the Fab Lab to make their vision of reality. So that's what you're going to see. So if we could please roll the video.
Creativity, critical thinking, and collaboration, what the Fab Foundation and what Fab Labs are all about. In 2014, Chevron made a commitment to the Fab Foundation of $10 million to establish Fab Labs across the United States in areas that we have operations.
A Fab Lab is the place where students and entrepreneurs come to imagine, to design, and then to make almost anything that they want.
This Fab Lab was established in partnership with California State University, Bakersfield, and it's the first of our planned Fab Labs.
California State University is joining a global network of over 400 Fab Labs in more than 50 countries.
My students are so excited to go to the Fab Lab to produce what they have created in the classroom.
The Bakersfield lab has a couple of laser cutters, a couple of 3D printers, a small NC milling machine. It's a whole suite of tools that allows you to make just about anything.
Welcome to the Fab Lab.
Have to be on a sensor.
Okay, so that looks good. He made this all by himself. Seeing these projects come out that the students have worked so hard on has just been the greatest experience. It doesn't really work right now. Not every design is coming out as anticipated. And so when you have to rework the project, the students really see the design process in action.
It works! Yesterday, we thought, okay, let's make a truck. Today, we have the truck in our hand.
Guys, this is awesome! Creativity, critical thinking, and collaboration.
Dr. Madden, I mean, sorry, Dr. Madden. Yeah, very exciting, by the way. We can clap for that if you like.
Yeah, I hope you can sort of feel the energy of the students. That's the energy of the lab all the time. I'd like to next introduce Dr. Andrea Medina. She is our Director of Grants and Outreach, and she provides leadership for all of our outreach programs, including the Fab Lab. And she's going to just tell you a little bit about some other things that are going on in the Fab Lab besides field trips.
Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Medina.
Good morning. Thank you so much for your time. I just want to mention that in the video, Sherry Lassiter said we were a part of a worldwide network of 400 labs. That number has jumped up to over 1,200 worldwide labs. We are the only Fab Lab within the CSU and UC system, and we are the only lab that is open to the public free of charge. We were one of 6 labs nationwide chosen by the National Science Foundation to participate in a grant examining diversity issues in computational science programs. And in 2017, we were selected for the beautiful Bakersfield Award for Education. And over the next few slides, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the various programming that we do offer. We do K-12 outreach, programs for our CSUB students, summer camps, and community programming. Our Connecting High-Tech Education to Youth program offers informal STEM learning opportunities for K-12 students. Last year, we did have a dedicated staff member who visited over 6,000 Kern County students through a combination of on-site classroom visits and tours of the Fab Lab. Right now, we're doing our Roadrunner Science Fridays. That's where K-12 students can come visit the Fab Lab, tour, and do an activity. And while they're there on campus, they actually also get to visit some other labs and participate and interact with some of our STEM majors with some hands-on activities. We're also in the development stages of what's called Maker in a Box kits. That's going to be for our Kern County teachers. We'll train them on how to use the kits, and then they'll be able to take those kits into their classroom and introduce their students to some basic digital fabrication activities. For CSB students, we offer both paid and unpaid internships. Many of our students can earn course credit through project work, and most of our interns there staff all of our outreach activities. As Dr. Madden mentioned previously, we do have the Fab Fest. It's Fab Fest and the Kinetic Sculpture Competition. Our engineering majors fabricate human-powered vehicles that are used in an obstacle course and do some other challenges that we host each spring that is open to the public. We also have lab hours only for our students, and so at any given time you can find art students in there working on projects, theater majors working on set design, and of course, computer engineering majors who are working on soldering circuit boards. Over the summer, we offer numerous camps for our nonprofit agencies, and we also have our annual Revs Pup program for middle school students. Those are week-long summer camps where the kids learn how to use the vinyl cutters, laser cutters, 3D printers, and ShopBot, and all of these camps are free of charge. We also offer K-12 teacher training during the summer where they get to learn more about digital fabrication and how to use the tools. Finally, our community programs, we offer weekly and monthly after-school programming. Right now, we work with the Girl Scouts, but we have also worked with the Boys and Girls Club. We have open access community hours, several evenings per week and all day on Saturdays for the community. We've hosted board retreats for team building days, specifically for the Boys and Girls Club. And we've also recently partnered with our Kern County libraries to offer hands-on activities for their patrons. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Dr. Matt. Sorry.
So Supervisor Gleason and Supervisor Scrivener actually have come out and visited the lab. We invite the rest of you to come out if you have a chance. And to pique your interest, we have a little something for you today. This was created with our laser cutter, and it has the seal on the front and your name and your district, and then it has the Fab Lab seal on the back. So
great, thank you. A few things are more exciting than watching children's minds turn on with the fact that they're grasping a new idea, and it's just exciting. In my own children, when you saw, their minds work. It's such a blessing to see that. So we're excited.
My children aren't there yet. We're still working on it.
Hope burns eternal, right? Yeah.
So thank you again very much for the opportunity. And if there's any questions, we are happy to answer them.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is spectacular. Thank you very much.
Are there any members of the public that would like to make comment about the presentation that we just received? Mr. Agbalog, could you please give us your name for the record?
Good morning, Romeo Agbalog on behalf of Kern Citizens for Sustainable Government. Happy New Year to all of you, and I want to just say congratulations to Cal State University Bakersfield and Chevron for this wonderful partnership and this great presentation before your board. I also want to take the time to thank you, the board, and especially Teresa Hitchcock and your CAO for their support in bringing these presentations forward. I think it's really a wonderful thing to see folks partner, specifically public-private partnerships, to help educate our local students, invest in our local workforce, and make Kern County a better place to do business and work in. And for those reasons, just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aguilar. Appreciate you coming forward to say that. I don't see anyone else, so we'll return to the board. And I neglected, Ms. Hitchcock, to ask you if you want to make any comments before we close and return to the board for comment and action.
I do. I'd like to thank Cal State and Chevron for creating the Fab Lab. The importance of having our students interact with the university cannot be stressed enough. Those positive interactions for our K through 12 students really will influence their thought process on attending college, and we really need more interactive programs like this in order to raise our educational attainment rates in the county. So thank you, Chevron and Cal State, for really making these opportunities available to our students. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Hitchcock. And I want to say thank you to not only Cal State for their participation, but Mr. Alvidrez, when you said Chevron was asked to spend some money, you didn't say it was $10 million across the country. So that is a big ask, and you guys are wonderful corporate neighbors in our community. And I just want to say thank you as well for that. So great presentation. Anybody from the board want to make comment, or yes, Supervisor Gleason?
Real quick, because I'd been out there, it was a blast. I had a wonderful time. It was a lot of fun. She's absolutely correct. The excitement out there is palpable. You can touch it, you can feel it, you can sense it, and the goodness that they're bringing to the community, education is just a great thing. So thank you very much for all you do.
Supervisor Perez, I apologize. I overlooked that you had punched in. So do you have a comment?
I think that's from earlier.
Oh, it was from earlier.
But
Okay.
now that I'm on the spot,
Okay.
thank you. You're wonderful. No.
Okay, sorry. Okay, I'm learning, having to relearn the buttons on as the chairman as we go forward. So, okay, thank you very much. Everybody's said their piece. So is there a motion to receive and file the report?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
All, please indicate your vote.
The motion is approved. 4 ayes, 1 absent. Supervisor Scrivener.
Thank you. Next is item number 19, a proposed retroactive agreement with the City of Shafter from the Fire Department. Chief Marshal, good morning.
Good morning, Chairman Maggard, members of the board. As you mentioned, this is a proposed retroactive agreement with the City of Shafter for the Kern County Fire Department to provide fire and emergency services and State Fire Marshal regulation enforcement. This is one of several contracts that the fire department's brought to your board this year. We have one left after this one, the City of Arvin. This is the standard methodology that we've used with all of the contracts with the exception of McFarland. As your board's well aware, we are negotiating a long-term agreement with McFarland. Again, this methodology takes into account the population across the county, fire station staffing, fire fund, and it creates a allocated cost to the cities. The city's total allocated cost for fire protection in this fiscal year is $872,000 and $976. But they generate $1,128,000 in fire fund that creates an excess. And this is one of the things that we've been negotiating with the City of Shafter. We've worked with the County Administrative Office, County Council, and determined that the best use of this overage is for future fire protection needs in the City of Shafter. The city continues to grow, and that presents a challenge to the fire department as we have to respond to a larger area to protect the City of Shafter. The overage is $255,000, and what we have agreed in meetings is any of this excess revenue will be put into a designation for fire-related operations, including future fire service needs, fire apparatus, major maintenance, or capital facility constructions that are a mutual benefit to the city and the county, as agreed upon by the city manager for Shafter and myself as the fire chief. This is a 5-year contract. We look forward to serving the city of Shafter for the next 5 years. It's a great partnership. We'll continue to meet and examine future growth needs in the city, so we're able to protect that in the way that they need to be protected. Therefore, it's recommended that your board approve the proposed agreement with non-standard terms and conditions with the City of Shafter for fire protection services, authorize the chairman to sign the agreement, and authorize the auditor controller to process the specific budgetary adjustments and accounting transactions. That concludes my presentation. We're available to answer any questions your board may have.
Thank you, Chief Marshal. Are there any members of the public that would like to make comment about this item this morning? Good morning, sir. Could you please give us your name for the record and proceed? Thank you.
Sure. Good morning, Chairman and members of the board. My name is Jim Zervis. I'm the Administrative Services Director for the City of Shafter. Just like to say thank you to county staff, in particular the fire staff, the CAO's office, and county council in the development of this agreement. We in Shafter enjoy a long-standing, mutually beneficial relationship with the county that we think is both open and cooperative. And this agreement is just another example of that. And so we thank you for your consideration today. As the fire chief mentioned, this is an important contract for us. Not only does it provide for our immediate fire needs, as the county has for many years, but it really does help set the stage for our continued growth, both in residential and economic development within the city, which is mutually beneficial to the entire region, your citizens as well as ours. So I'd just like to say thank you. I'm here to answer any questions. We are just here to voice our support for the agreement.
Thank you, sir. If we have questions for you, we'll ask you to come back up and just comment.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any other members of the public wish to make comment to us this morning regarding this item? We'll return to the board then. Supervisor Gleason.
Thanks, Chairman. Thanks, Jim, for being here. Appreciate it. Chief, good job. I know it's been a long road getting there. I'd like to also thank the patience of the city of Shafter, the city council, the city manager, everybody weighing in to make sure we get this just right. We cross all the T's and dot all the I's and have a strategic plan that only takes care of today but moves us into the future. So I think it's a good deal, and I will make a motion on staff's recommendation.
That is approved and adopt the resolution. We have a motion and a second. Please, any other comments? Please cast your votes.
Motion is approved, 4 ayes, 1 absent. Supervisor Scrivener.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Item number 29 is next, which is from the Public Health Department. Matt Constantine is going to make a presentation to us in response to an August 22, 2017 request for an analysis of pedestrian and bicycle accidents. Good morning, Mr. Constantine.
Good morning. I appreciate the time this morning. I am joined by Lisa Amarias, who is our GIS for Public Health, and of course Craig Pope, the Public Works Director. The item before you this morning is a joint response from both Public Health and Public Works on a referral that Supervisor Maggard and Supervisor Perez made regarding the high rate of pedestrian and bicycle accidents in Kern County. In particular, you requested we evaluate environmental conditions, including street lighting and time of day of the accident, and if the pedestrian was in a crosswalk. This discussion is obviously very important, but even more so this morning as there were 2 more fatalities that occurred over this last weekend in Oildale. A 15-year-old girl that was killed as she walked across the road at Decatur and Chester, and a 58-year-old man that was killed while on his bicycle at Chester and Norris. To help assist with this evaluation, Public Health has created a web-based interactive map that will be maintained by Public Works and ITS that includes 10 years of data, detailed data that we've obtained from CHP involving pedestrian and bicycle collisions. Every accident has been plotted along with all the related environmental conditions and that were observed by CHP. In addition, the plotted points, we have evaluated trends and have included heat maps that identifies areas within the county that experience a higher rate of accidents than others, and have also identified intersections that have a higher propensity of accidents. We believe this information can be used to direct targeted resources to achieve the greatest level of impact. Beginning this morning, this map is available to the public and is available on the county's homepage. We'd like to demo that map for you this morning, but there's a couple limitations that I just want to mention. This data only includes information from the unincorporated area of the county that CHP has provided to us. We are working with the Bakersfield Police Department to also obtain similar data that we can incorporate within the city limits. We are also missing information from Caltrans. They investigate accidents that occur on state routes, for example, Highway 184. So those are not on the map as of yet, but again, we're working with Caltrans to include it. And this map is also delayed by a few months that Lisa will walk us through. It takes a while for CHP to investigate the accidents and relay that to us. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Lisa to walk us through of the map.
Ms. Amarias, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Matt. So as Matt mentioned, the data that we are looking at in this map is from 2007 to August of 2017, so just about 10 years. So when we open up the map, we get this little home panel that just gives a brief description of the data, as well as just some basic functionality of how to work the map. So on the left-hand side, we have all of the map elements, and we can go ahead and click these check boxes to see all of the total pedestrian and bicycle collisions that happened in the past 10 years. So right off the bat, we see a very large number of collisions that occurred between pedestrians and bicycles. So the little gray icon means that a pedestrian was involved in that incident, and the blue icon with the bicycle means that that was a bicycle collision. We filtered the data a little bit more to also look at the fatalities that have occurred. So the red icons with the pedestrian mean that incident, a pedestrian was killed. And the red icon with the bicycle means that a bicyclist was killed. We then looked at it a little bit further to see who was at fault in these incidents. So we can turn on this layer right here to see if the pedestrian was at fault. So for example, they were walking in the road, not walking in a crosswalk, something like that. Or we can see if the driver was at fault. We have the little car icon, meaning the driver was traveling at an unsafe speed, unsafe maneuvering, that sort of thing. We then wanted to look at some of the environmental factors that could have come into play. So we can go ahead and turn on the total pedestrian fatalities and look at some of the environmental factors, such as did it happen during the day, did it happen after dark, and were there street lights? So when we turn these on, we see in the corner of the icons, the little yellow kind of represents a sun, so it happened at daylight. The little asterisks mean there were no street lights. Down here we see the little moon icon, meaning that it was at dark. So it just at a glance, it kind of gives an idea of the environmental factors that were occurring at the time of the incident. So moving on, we wanted to do a little bit of an analysis of where in the county these incidents are occurring most often. So the first one we'll look at, we're calling it point density. You kind of see the map get sprinkled with these little blue dots. If we zoom into this area on Rosedale, the darker the blue dot, the more incidents occurred in that area. One of the other analysis we run was looking at high-risk intersections. So we're seeing these red stars, meaning those are the intersections that had a high number of pedestrian and bicycle collisions. And so if we turn point density back on, we see those dark blue coincide with the high-risk collisions. And then just to make it a little more visually friendly, we also did a heat map showing the high-risk areas. So we have this kind of area in Oildale, Northchester, and Roberts Lane, and also down here along Mount Vernon and Niles Street. And again, these are all of the pedestrian and bicycle collisions that occurred in the past 10 years, just in the unincorporated areas. And then one kind of neat tool that we added, let me turn this one back on here, is if we want to get a little bit more details about a particular incident, we can zoom in, and we have this toolbar up here, and we have the ability to look at it as on the street view. So we can move our little blue icon, and we can see kind of like a Google Map view of what the actual street looks like. So this is right by East High School, kind of right near our building on Quincy Drive. So that is our traffic collision map, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer it.
Colleagues, sorry, Mr. Constantine.
Mr. Pope also has a presentation related, so we'll shift seats at your discretion. And
This is related to the map?
Yes.
Very good, okay. So I think there might be some questions about the map before we move away from that part of the topic. Oh, I think Mr. Pope is also going to talk about the map, is that correct? Yeah.
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Details of the map, you'll have to turn back to them, but I'll show you what Public Works has been working with, the information, the same information that was put onto the map and what we're trying to accomplish with that. First of all, what is our problem? Our problem is that we have vehicles and either pedestrians or bicycles trying to occupy the same space at the same time. Simply put, they run into each other. That's either through human error or a facility isn't good enough that they can accommodate both sets of traffic at the same time. One of the things our challenges is, as they pointed out, the amount of information that's out there is variable. Different news sources come up with a different number every time. I can just say that we have too many. We need to do whatever we can to improve the situation. One of our challenges in Kern County is that our existing conditions were not set up for pedestrian bike traffic. We were developed at a time when cars were thought of, but they weren't thinking about putting sidewalks and they weren't thinking about bike routes in there. It was just a time back in the 40s, 50s, 60s where they didn't do that. So we have a lot of catching up to do. So our improvements that we come through with from Public Works are basically those things, to try and avoid conflicts of pedestrians and bike riders by either giving them their separate paths, bike lanes, routes, separate sidewalks, to get them out of the streets, and or where they are in conflict with each other crossing the street, we make it a little more visible so people are aware. One of our big challenges is awareness. Completed projects. This is just to give you a past few years of what we're doing. And we overlaid these on top of the heat map that was shown before. And this is a really good tool because it shows where we now know through the heat map of the problems. Those are the areas we've been targeting. We know what they're out. So in Oildale, we've had $750,000 on McRae, Northchester over $1 million, and Northchester bike lane, bike loops, $260,000. Over in East Bakersfield, Virginia Avenue, again through the hot spot areas, we had a sidewalk project, $500,000, $1,750,000 on Center Street area. That was a whole community that we did. Niles and Monterey, pedestrian safety projects where we put in sidewalk. That heat map really does show where we need to concentrate our efforts, and it shows that we have been doing that. Funded projects. We typically get our funding from other sources. This isn't our money. So it takes a while. And why I mentioned funded is because from the time we identify a problem, scope it, complete an application, turn it in, get ranked, get approved for money, get the go-ahead to spend the money, design it, build it, it could be 5 years. So a lot of these big projects that we're doing are a 5-year timeline, and we've been at it for some time. One of the funded projects we have is countdown heads, and these are, we're going to put them up on, again, the high-risk intersections. It's another tool to bring awareness. People that are not aware of what's going on out there, just one more tool. So this is the East Bakersfield locations we'll be putting it at, and in the Oildale, again, targeting those areas that need extra help. Funded projects that are in our future and that we're working on hard, Rexland Acres, $6.3 million. Roseman Boulevard, $1 million. Boron, $2.3 million. Lamont, $2.1 million. Mojave, $2.8 million. Virginia Streets, $2.4 million. Northchester, another 1.7. This is on top of the ones we already completed. All these have been grants that we've been out there applying for. We formed an advanced planning section in Public Works to try and go after these things. In 2017, Kern County was awarded over $10 million in grants. It's the highest per capita in the state of California. Our group has done an amazing job, and we have a lot of needs, so we're out there trying to get it. Highlighted active transportation projects and interactive stories are available at www.walkkern.com, and I'll show you more about that in a little bit. Over the last 10 years, we have spent close to $53 million on projects since 2007. But is that enough? According to Kern Cog, we still have another $53 million to go. So we're really about halfway there. It's a lot of the catch-up we're doing because we had a community that was not set up for ped and bike safety. So we're continuing to apply for grants. We use our own money as match for ATP, which is a state program for active transportation, TDA, which is sales tax that's aimed at transit and bike and safety, and then CD money. We use those in communities where they're need sidewalk and things like that. With SB1 in the background, all these sources of funds are reliant on SB1 holding. If it gets repealed, I can say that probably 90% of what we've talked about has gone away. When we apply for these grants, what type of selection criteria we do? Safety is always our number one consideration. We take a look at an area that shows up, like on that heat map, and say, what can we do to make it better? And that the fact that we now have the heat map as an additional tool, all the better. Projected use, current projected use around schools, we get a lot more points. Traffic volume, where there's a lot of traffic and we have many corridors that have a lot of traffic, they rank higher. And disadvantaged community status. We are taking federal funds, and so wherever we have disadvantaged communities, they get additional points. Future projects that are on our radar right now that we're applying for and trying to get money for, again, is we overlaid it on top of the heat map. China Grade, Northchester, safety projects. Norris Road, another safety project. Future project is out in the Casaloma. It will be one of the entire neighborhoods because the neighborhood itself has no curb gutter sidewalk. And so we need to separate the people because they walk out in the street. I mean, if you don't have sidewalk, you walk in the street. One of our successes that will help us to make sure we're pointed in the right direction is we were awarded a $250,000 grant to go hire a consultant to give this their separate eyes on the whole situation and make sure we're heading the right way. Right now, we're in the process of hiring a consultant to do that. www.walkkern.com. It is something that our advanced planning section has put together. It is one of their tools that they have been using to get these grants, and they've been very successful with it. I want to turn to it just for a moment. This is a web page. Again, it's www.walkkern.com, and it is, first of all,
Is it down here?
It is a map of Kern County, and it has on it all the projects that we have been talking about and that we're applying for. You can click on any one of them, and it will take you to the location and show you more details. We've gone through all this very fast. And just for examples, it pops around and goes to different ones, and over here on the right is a detailed map of what it is. We also have in it storyboards, for instance, the Walk Rexland Acres. This was a storyboard that we put together to apply for the grant. And it goes into the details of the community, and it goes into the community outreach, and it has with it, you know, all the history of what we put into making these projects and getting these grants. So that's out there, and it is one of our tools, and has been very successful. I mean, our group has been questioned as to why they have been so successful, and it's because of the effort we're putting into it. We acknowledge we have considerable need out there in our community to improve and always improve pedestrian and bicycle safety. So we have been talking about what Public Works does. It is because we do infrastructure, but that's only part of the issue, because if you go look at these accidents, you get into their history of what causes them. There's sometimes there's not enough light, sometimes there's not enough width, sometimes that, but a lot of times it's human error. And it can be human error on the pedestrian's fault, it can be human error on the vehicle driver's fault. And with that, we're looking to partner with health and talk to them and get from them advice on how to reach out and make people more aware. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Mr. Constantine.
Mr. Constantine?
Just very briefly, in the board letter is itemized a public awareness campaign that targets both pedestrians and drivers. It's a two-phased approach. The phase one can be implemented immediately. Our intent is to target those resources into those areas that were painted red by Lisa with billboards and Get Bus advertising. And then phase two, utilizing the CAO's office in KGov and Megan Pearson, is to develop some PSAs that could be shown in movie theaters and on radio for obviously car drivers, and on TV, that could also be targeted towards drivers, so trying to hit both. So those costs are there for our discussion, but we stand ready to deploy those pieces, or all or any, at your desire. And I believe that concludes our presentations, and we stand ready to answer any questions.
Thank you. I'm sure we have many questions and would like to have a dialogue about this. Supervisors Gleason and Perez have indicated they'd like to ask questions. Would you like to do that before we hear from the public?
Sure.
You want to talk before?
Sure.
Okay. Supervisor Gleason.
I didn't punch in, but that was carried over from the last time. But
Oh, it was.
I do have a question before we go, so thank you very
All
much.
right.
I didn't see a lot of activity in Ridgecrest, Kern River Valley, the Delano area, in my district. Could you comment on that, please?
This is something that we have to always be aware of, and that when they say there are accidents in Kern County, that's the county as a whole. Our group, especially Kern County Public Works, is most focusing on those which are our responsibility. Incorporated cities, they have their own programs. Caltrans, they have their own programs. We can identify those areas and we can target them with public information, but as far as public infrastructure type projects, they would be required to do the same thing we're doing.
But did we look outside the city of Ridgecrest in the Kern area? Because I know there have been bicycle deaths out there.
Yes, we do.
Okay, thanks.
You'd like to wait? Okay, very good. Thank you, Supervisor Perez. I think Mr. Kretzinger would like to make a comment about this. He came forward earlier, and I suggested that he wait until now. Good morning, Mr. Kretzinger. Could you give us your name again and then tell us what your concern is?
Kretzinger, K-R-E-T-S-I-N-G-E-R, Victor H. I live in Oildale, and my questions are probably directed towards this board over here, Mr. Constantine. Does the Highway Patrol the Highway Patrol have a section on their accident report as to clothing of the pedestrian bicycle rider? Because that plays an important part, as we have all been driving down the street and somebody in dark clothing in a dark area zips across. So that's a main concern that I have a question about. Do you have any statistics about pedestrian accidents in California, where pedestrian has the right-of-way, versus New York, where the pedestrian does not have the right-of-way? question. And as far as sidewalks and people walking in the streets, I live in Oildale. We don't have very many streetlights in our area. People walk right down the middle of the street wearing dark clothing. How many of us have had a near miss in those areas? So it's education. Going back to the board now, why don't we put a education program in our school system where we teach the first graders how to cross a street? Because all of us have seen people walk right to an intersection, straight across without looking left or right.
We'll try to get answers for all your questions, sir. So if you and you may have another one, so feel free to have a seat there, and I'm not trying to cut you off, though. Was that all your questions at the moment?
I believe it was.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kritzinger.
Thank you.
I think the schools is an easy one to handle first for him. We discussed we had a meeting on December 20th, I think it was, Supervisor Perez and myself and an array of staff about this, and then from there asked this report to come forward. In that meeting, we talked about reaching out to schools and have them cooperate with us to do a public education awareness program in schools. I know when I was a child, we had the streets laid out and sidewalks and little fake traffic signals, and you look left, look right, look left. I do the same thing with my grandson now that I was taught when I was 5 years old. He's 4 years old. It's the same time of life. But is that not, Mr. Constantine, one of the issues one of the aspects we're trying to proceed with?
Yes, sir. Obviously, this is a good opportunity for us to educate our children about pedestrian safety. We've reached out to the superintendent of schools and have started coordinating with them. As you can imagine, there are many districts doing many different ventures. Some have grant funding to do this. Some have very focused efforts. Some have long-term goals. Our hope is to try to develop some sort of curriculum that could be used everywhere. But certainly there's some leaders in the community that we can emulate and see how their success is.
I would hope that we would do it district-wide, but the Bakersfield City Schools, which serves much of the area that Supervisor Perez and I represent, and Standard and Beardsley are clearly ones that we should target for that. His next question, I believe, had to do with what kind of clothing they wore, and this might be a good time for you to explain. You have some statistics on how many accidents were at night, how many were outside of a crosswalk. That might be good to layer that in. I'm not trying to get heavy, Supervisor Perez. Are you okay?
Oh, I love
jumping
it.
in? Okay.
I love it. I have so much to say. I'm eager to get going whenever we're ready.
Okay.
And if I could have some help with the clerk, I think we have a document that we could show. Okay. It's going to be over here. As we prepare for that, I'll answer to the right of Lisa. Are we not? We seem to be close. As we look at this, Mr. Chairman, there is a lot of data that the CHP provides to us on each individual accident. Lisa is demonstrating it. Oh, well, we're doing too many things at once. The clothing, though, is not included in what the CHP provides to us. So we don't have any information on color of clothing.
You do a marvelous job, Ms. Krause. What we're trying to do for the members of the public is zoom in on a piece of paper to show it on that screen. That is a chart that demonstrates the numbers that Mr. Constantine would like to discuss. Oh, the top of Ryan's head, I'm sure, is very interesting, but that's not what we're wanting to look at.
Yes, so supervisors, what we're looking at here is we've broken down the data to look at it by year. And remember, this is just the data that was sent to us from the CHP. So in this first column, we have the total pedestrian and bicycle collisions. So for 2017, for example, there were 56 collisions that involved a pedestrian and a bicycle. And remember, this is just up to August 31st. The next column is the total fatalities that happened in that year. Moving on, we have the fatalities where the person was not in a crosswalk. We have fatalities that occurred after dark, and then fatalities that occurred after dark and there were no streetlights. So looking at the bottom, we've summed it up and did a quick percentage. So for example, in the past 10 years, 79% of the fatalities, the person was not in a crosswalk.
Thank you. I think that answers as much as we can Mr. Kretzinger's questions. I'll come back to this one in a moment, but I don't want to delay Supervisor Perez any longer. Supervisor Perez.
Thank you, Chairman. This is very exciting and so cool. And it really feels to me like the absolute best of us and what we do when we collaborate the way that we have around this particular issue. And I, in a rare moment of gratitude to the press, I have to say thank you for hounding Chairman Maggard and myself, two members of the City Council that originally embarked on this journey with us several years ago, to figure out what in the heck is going on and what does this mean and what are the causes. And Craig, you remember when we first started out, it was my staff and Jeff from Chairman Maggard's office looking through old CHP records trying to compile data on what is going on. And so the pressure from the press, the interest from the public, the incredible passion and care of Louis Gill at the homeless shelter and Jim Baldwin at BARC, pressuring their government to respond and think about these issues as part of our business and something that we can do something about. So this is very, very exciting. And this interactive map may not seem like much to new observers, but this is really major progress in us comprehending under what circumstances are the physical environment to be held responsible or to look at and something we can do and fix as soon as possible. And then, of course, the human behavioral issues that we know are potentially subjected to change with the right kind of marketing. We know that marketing impacts behavior, it modifies behavior. And so really a special hats off to you, Matt, because you really get this. I think more than anyone at the county, frankly, you really get the way people respond to an aggressive and effective campaign to be more conscious of what is causing these particular fatalities here and tragedies, of which this young 15-year-old who just recently died is a close personal friend to a staffer of mine. So, I have to thank my staff and Chairman Maggard's staff for really doing a lot of the work, of course, with the guidance of the board and Chairman Maggard and myself to say this is something we know we can do something about. It's within our power, it's within our jurisdiction, and when we collaborate the way that we have, this is the kind of outcome we get. And so I really am happy to start the year out this way. This is what we should be doing within, not just communicating and working with the private sector, that's so important, but within the assets that we have, we utilize them. And again, thank you to the press for literally hounding me on this issue. It really impacts the outcome when we're moving together in the same direction. Lastly, to Craig Pope, I really appreciate you highlighting the SB1 opportunities. This is clearly a difficult and complicated issue in a very complicated political climate that I so appreciate. We are doing everything we can to try to stay above. It's not easy. And we're not perfect, but this issue is so critical to the future of local government, the future of roads and bridges, and the public infrastructure that is critical to economic development and the success of this county and this state. And so I'm so proud to be part of CSAC, leading the charge, taking the direction from the experts on the ground like Craig Pope and others around the state that are saying we are absolutely at a tipping point and at a crisis with our public infrastructure, and that we must make decisions now to invest there, as complicated as they are, we must do it. So thank you for highlighting those additions, Craig, and for all of the changes we can continue to make. And I appreciate we're able to answer to the press, here's what we're doing with your money, the government, the people's money. Here's how we are making change and getting better. So I really heartfelt thank you. This is really, really cool. And I think the best of us. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Supervisor Perez, for your earnest passion and commitment to making a difference in this. It's been a pleasure to work with you on this, and I'm sure we'll continue to do so. I want to make sure I just didn't cut off anybody from the public. Did anybody else from the public want to make comment to us this morning about this before we return to the board? Okay, let's come back to the board then. Colleagues, I have a few questions, but I'm happy to let any other colleagues ask questions first. Okay, thank you. Mr. Constantine, Mr. Pope, Ms. Emeritus, thank you for this. Ms. Emeritus is a guru of this GIS stuff. It's incredible to watch her on the fly pull this, that, and the other thing up. And I have a friend who was hit by a car out on Alfred Harrell, out by the Hart Park by what bike riders call Jost Hill. And it was interesting. We pulled up that exact incident. I was on the scene. I saw exactly what happened reflected in that report. It is incredible. It was chilling. I just got chills talking about how close my friend came to being killed. But it is remarkable what is there. And Ms. Emeritus, particularly nothing against you, Matt, but Ms. Emeritus, thank you for developing the skill set it takes to do this. Okay, I have a few questions. Could we go back to that overhead that, is it tattooed on Ryan Alsop's head, or is that just something that was near him? He says he's ready to go. Thank you. On the far right of this spreadsheet is a column that says fatalities after dark and no street lights. As we look at, I'm going to ask, I'm sure we're going to be supportive of finding effective ways to get the biggest bang for the buck to try to save people's lives. That column, I think, needs to be analyzed a bit more. If 36% of the accidents happened after dark with no streetlights, I'm interested in how many of the accidents happened after dark with streetlights. Because one of the interesting things that we discovered as we looked at this information, it's the deepest dive that we've taken into it. It really brings us forward with so much more to chew on to how to try and make a difference in this. But I was surprised at how many accidents occur at nighttime with a streetlight. So I think some analysis, and I'm interested in your input here, Mr. Pope, if you think, if it's warranted. Is the street light at nighttime the determining factor of whether or not there's an accident and a fatality? If it is, then we have a lot of street lights to put in. But if it's not, if as often as not, if 36% of them are at night with no street light, how many of them were at night with a street light? I think that's an interesting question for us to explore, Mr. Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think visibility is always critical to these things, and it does nothing but good, but we're up against communities that don't want streetlights. They want their dark skies and stuff, so we have to reach that balance point. I think any major intersection that has street signals or anything has lights, but there are some that are still unlit, and we should be looking at those. Mm-hmm. We'll definitely get into that detail.
Thank you. The next, the two columns, the 79% column, fatalities not in a crosswalk. 79% of the time, the fatality occurred when somebody is crossing the street outside of a crosswalk. Jaywalking is the old term for it. And 65% of the fatalities occur after dark. So a large majority of the accidents are occurring at nighttime and people crossing the street unsafely in the middle of a block. And I commiserate with my constituent, Mr. Kretzinger from Oildale, that it is scary to drive through some neighborhoods. I have the same in my district. I often drive along Virginia Avenue and Potomac from between Mount Vernon and Oswell. It's very dark in those neighborhoods. It's all at Larry Street, Texas Street. It's very dark in those neighborhoods. Same thing in Oildale. There are some lights on North Chester, but as you get off in the neighborhoods on the President Streets, the Wilson and Woodrow and the Lincoln and all those ones. It's very, very dark. So it's a scary thing to drive down the road and not see someone when they've darted out in front of you. And as Mr. Kretzinger pointed out, very, very often wearing very dark clothing. I don't know why that's the case, but it is often the case. So I'm perplexed as to how we can ask people, how we can urge people, how we can compel people to take caution with their own life, to be more careful with what they do. And I don't know how we change that human behavior. Do you have any comment about that, Mr. Constantine, Mr. Pope?
Mr. Chairman, I'll fall back on your constituents' same concept. I learned it as a small child in the schools. I mean, we had a program in our schools that made us afraid of traffic, and you have to fear traffic. What I see out there, people, a lot of these accidents, they do just as he described. They walk straight on through the intersection. They don't even look. We have to somehow bring a little fear back in their lives that they have to be responsible for it, and that's through education.
Mr. Chairman, some of the proposed outreach material in the board letter, I think, may address that to draw awareness so that the individuals pay more attention. Mr. Alsop had a good idea, too, about targeting campaigns towards drivers in some of those areas that have a higher propensity of accidents, asking them to be more cautious as they enter one of these areas that have higher accident rates. So maybe a mixture of approaches could help.
Thank you. Another thing that is interesting about these numbers that I don't believe you have access to currently is, let's take the 79% of those that were crossing outside a crosswalk and 65% of the time it was after dark. We don't have a statistic, do we, on how many of those people were under the influence of alcohol, drugs, or whatever else, so they were not in full possession of their faculties as they stepped into that street. Isn't that a number that we don't yet have from the CHP?
If I could ask the clerk to turn on the screen from our computer. The CHP does provide a label for that. It is oftentimes not filled out. And this is, as you click on each individual accident, you can pull it up. This has an abbreviation of HNBD, has not been determined. We find in most cases it is absent of a value, or it does not indicate if there is some sobriety issue involved. So there's the potential, but I don't think there's data yet for us to pull and provide some sort of analysis.
I think that's just another part of the public awareness aspect for us to look at. I have a few questions specific to my district that I'd like to ask about, but I also want to make sure that that we talk about the fact that I hope that there's a way we can share our information and seek from our municipalities in our county, not only Bakersfield but Ridgecrest, Arvin, whatever other cities there are, Delano, wherever there are out there where there's some hot spots. What are the best practices? What are they doing? Because the city of Bakersfield has done a couple things that we're gonna pick up and try and emulate them. Conversely, I think we're trying some things that maybe they might try to do. So I'm very interested in sharing that with other cities. Ridgecrest were the ones I mentioned. So I think that's important for us to do. In looking at the areas where there is a problem, I would like you to highlight to me, at least in my district, but if it's wiser to do it county-wide, that's fine. What are the 5 most, and I know you know this because I didn't give you a heads up about it, but what are the 5 most dangerous locations? Is there an area that, should we focus there first to see if we can save a life tomorrow? Because, I didn't realize that 15-year-old girl on North Chester was somebody that your staff knew, Letitia. That's terrible. Terrible. But yesterday, I was driving down North Chester, and 2 young men on their little bikes are darting across, jumping the median and right in front of me, and they look up at me as they're directly in front of my car, hoping I'll stop. That's just horrible. But if you can't do that on the fly, I don't mind if you get back to us about the top 5. You want to talk about that now or later?
Mr. Chairman, if I might take a stab at that, I think this would be a good time to kick off the concept of safety corridors, where we identify not just an individual spot, but a corridor of traffic, say in North Chester, where we need to put more emphasis, and we can do it through a combined effort of our public works projects, some of which we can move faster. If we're not using grant funds, we can move a little faster, but mostly through public education and enhanced enforcement. Get more CHP presence up there and get the message out to the public that this is a corridor that you need to be aware that we've had a history here. So we can try and identify that and get the people looking both ways a little more. So this, I think we'd like to just take this as an opportunity to kick off the safety corridor concept.
Okay. I'm going to ask you some more about that in a moment. Mr. Constantine.
Mr. Chairman, if we look at the map, there are certainly some areas, as Mr. Pope has indicated, that have some pretty high rates of accidents. Northchester and Roberts, Roberts and Oildale, Northchester and Norris, Norris and McRae, and Mount Vernon and Niles, I believe. Those clearly are probably the top 5 areas over a 10-year period of time that have the most events.
Mount Vernon, just south of Nile Street, a half a block. It's the back driveway into the Vallarta Market there. I'm sure Letitia knows, sorry, Supervisor Perez knows exactly where I'm talking about. There is a curb cut in the median that allows people to walk across. That is a zoo. It is terribly dangerous for people going both directions. So that's one I think we should do something about. But I think we should try to focus on where are the most people being hurt the most often and see what we can do about that. The pedestrian corridors that Mr. Pope mentioned, I'm interested in an idea that are called, from that meeting on the 20th of December, I started calling it pedestrian danger zones. For example, on Morning Drive by Foothill High School, we had 3 young ladies hit in 2 separate accidents, and we did something about it. Mr. Pope did a fabulous job of stepping up with Caltrans. We changed the whole character of that intersection where that was occurring at Eucalyptus and Morning Drive. So what can we do about these other areas? And these pedestrian danger zones, I think, is an idea I'd like us to pursue. I know that it's more complicated than I think it is, but my job is to cast a vision as I see it, and your job is to see if we can make that happen, if it's plausible, if it's viable. So these very bright flashing lights and very bright colored signs that say you're in a pedestrian danger zone. In an area where we know these accidents occur, I'd like to have those signs erected. And you tell me I have money from my district, I'll spend the money from my district to help get that done if that's what it takes. But how can we make the public aware that they're in an area where many, many accidents occur? I also think, now this is going to be a bit of a challenge, I also think rather than have those lights on 24/7 for the rest of eternity, eventually people will become numb to those lights flashing. Whenever there's a pedestrian walking past that sign, I'd like that sign to light up like a motion detector. And I'm interested in how we might be able to go about doing that so that whether it's 2 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, that sign goes off that indicates somebody's walking in this pedestrian danger zone. I mentioned the 2 o'clock in the morning because one of the hot spots that was very surprising to me is Edison Highway near Mount Vernon, near the Mercado Latino complex. Just east of that, as people are leaving that at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, there has been more than one accident where a pedestrian has been killed crossing Edison Highway, which is pitch black, at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Why are they crossing Edison Highway at 2 or 3 in the morning in the pitch black? Well, we don't know. One of our suspicions is maybe it's when the bar has closed down and they're walking home from the bar. I don't know. I'm not making a value judgment on that. I'm just recognizing there's danger there. So that's an area where I'd like us to focus. I also saw that on Oswell, there have been a number of accidents. This is between College and Nile Street. And there's an area there, Mr. Pope, that you and I have discussed where there is no sidewalk. The street was designed a long time ago. It's been expanded, but there are some areas where it hasn't been expanded, and people, they even park their car up in their driveway, not driveways, in their yards, because there's no safe way for them to park on the street and open their door without getting hit. So I'd like us to look at what we can do in that area of Oswald. I think, Mr. Pope, you know exactly where I'm talking about. I'm also interested in the issue of solar streetlights. One issue is the infrastructure it takes by PG&E or whoever the provider is to have a streetlight in an area. The second issue is how we energize that streetlight and how we pay for that. But a third alternative is that might be quicker and more if we want to make an immediate impact, it might be another alternative is to put in solar streetlights. And I have money in my district. I'm happy to pay for those. Mr. Pope, we talked back on December 20th about if you might proceed with placing an order. Has that happened yet? Are we in the process of having some of those lights in the queue on the way to us?
We have not placed an order, but we have been gathering information as to how many we need to do.
Okay, so I'd like to pursue that immediately for some of those areas in the 3rd district that are a problem. Okay, rather than belabor this more, I would like us to come to some consensus this morning as to, so please come back, Mr. Constantine, to the public awareness campaign. Give us a brief rundown on those, what those costs are, what it is you're proposing, and any action you'd like us to consider today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the board letter, again, there's 2 phases. And in the first phase, we have identified some bus wraps with the buses, some internal signage with the GET buses, to do some media coverage when those buses are deployed. Also, to develop some posters that could be distributed to different offices, county and other, and then some static billboards. As you have probably seen, we have put up some messaging on the electronic billboards. Those we have found to not be in those danger zones. We'd like to propose static billboards that are more directed towards those areas that are in the greatest need. So that's phase 1. Again, we're ready to deploy that immediately. The cost is associated with each one of those is included in the board letter.
And for the public's
sure.
purposes, could you tell us how much is the cost of phase 1?
Yes, sir. Just one moment. Mr. Chairman, the total cost for phase 1 is projected just under $67,000. Phase 2, if I may, includes the development of some additional material that we would ask for KGov's help and Megan Pearson's leadership. That is on developing radio PSAs to create 30-second public service announcements that we could run on different radio stations, to develop some television PSAs, and also some PSAs that could be run in movie theaters. The cost estimated for phase 2 is approximately $24,600. I think the total cost for the entire phase 1 and 2 is right about $89,600.
Thank you very much. Okay, can we have a discussion about where we're going to find this money? So can you give a comment about that, Mr. Constantine, Mr. Pope, and Mr. Alsop? Everybody's deferring to Mr. Alsop.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, this is a collaboration between the CEO's office, the Public Works Department, and Public Health. It has been since that first meeting. My job and the staff with me in my office are focused on making those folks over there successful in their endeavor in addressing the issue. Concur with everything Mr. Constantine said. I like identifying corridors and maybe wrapping some plans around those. I'm not sure it's wise to sort of decide on specifically what those things are at this point, but to maybe go in that direction. I think continuity is important across the county, so that we take the same approach to each of these sort of quote-unquote hotspot areas. But in terms of funding a campaign, we will. This is going to be a collaboration. We're gonna find a way to do it, if that's enough.
Okay. Did you have any other comment about that, Mr. Constantine or Mr. Pope?
Mr. Chairman, I think this is the type of thing we'd aim for getting a grant, but as I told you, the timeline on those is very long, so we need to find a shorter time frame to make this happen. So we'll work with CAO's office and help to do that.
And I think when it's time to post these PSAs and whatnot, that we can also go to our partner city partners in the county and asked them to help us in Bakersfield and Ridgecrest and Tehachapi and whatnot. I'm concerned about D1 and the concerns that Supervisor Gleason brought up. I want to make sure that we've talked about those and are emphasizing those. I'm also aware, although Supervisor Scrivener's not here this morning, it is not an unknown thing. There is a problem with pedestrians and bicyclists being hit on some of the rural roads in the Tehachapi area. So I'm sure he will be concerned. I don't want to speak for him, but I'm sure he will be concerned about that. So I'd like to hear a bit more robust treatment and concern for those outlying areas. I realize most of the deaths are concentrated in the greater Bakersfield area, but that doesn't mean the deaths in the areas outside of that aren't very significant. So, okay, colleagues, what do you think? Is this something we want to kick off and proceed with? Supervisor Perez, yeah, you're first, I think.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, you recall, Mr. Constantine, the day I went into preterm labor 2 months early.
Yes, I do.
Was not due to the stress of our recording earlier that day. That campaign was very effective, and I heard about it almost everywhere I went. In particular, I was on there with a big belly, so that was clever. But so I think it's probably why some people felt compelled to tell me how good they thought it was. But what I noticed around that time period was folks at the hair salon or other places talking about statistics on STDs, which is just it's not polite conversation, and it's uncomfortable. And so I don't normally see that. But during this campaign, because it was done in good taste and because it was highlighting a way to improve our lives, right, without really shaming people, if you will, even though I think, the behavior patterns we know are very unhealthy that tend to lead to these kind of outcomes, certainly I thought that was just such a nice balance. And I know you had different phases there, and as they kicked in, there were different aspects that were building upon what had been a foundation that you laid during phase one. So I'm really, really so pleased with the innovation involved here, the collaboration. I forgot to mention earlier Get Bus that we worked very closely with. Thank you. It didn't start out so smoothly, Chairman Maggard, you may recall. We had a few public battles over that, but that's good.
But it ended well.
It did, and it's clearly moving, continues to move in the right direction, in large part because of the leadership out of the county. But the city has been great to want to partake and be a part of it. And we know the majority of these fatalities occur in the city, and the vast majority east of the 99. So we have shared resources. Sometimes they've been more in one district other than the other, but because our districts abut, I know that they are improve the larger flow and the larger movement of people and goods and transportation models. So thank you again. I'm a big fan. I'd like to be supportive of this in any way I can. And I think the phased-in process makes sense. I've seen it work. I listened to the reaction from the community, and that's how and why I'm convinced it's so effective. Thank you.
Supervisor Gleason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I vote in favor of spending any general fund dollars, I need to have a better answer to my question. I need to know why District 1, the unincorporated areas of my district, were not incorporated in the study, and if they were incorporated in the study, then I didn't hear that during the presentation.
Mr. Costine.
Supervisor Gleason, through the chair, the data that you have in front of you on the map is inclusive of all of the unincorporated areas. It does not include the cities, as we only have data directly from the CHP. So that data is represented on the map.
Well, I know there were bicycle deaths outside the city of Ridgecrest in the Indian Wells Valley.
Can we pull those up right now?
Those are collisions, correct? Do you want to just review that, what you have?
Yes, so what we're looking at here is, as we see, there are no red icons on the map, so there are no fatalities in the data that was sent to us through CHP. In the past 10 years, it looks like there were 2 pedestrian collisions and 1 bicycle collision.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Supervisor Gleason. Anybody else have comment? So do we want to wait for more analysis for Mr. Gleason, or do we want to propose to proceed with funding. And I'm not trying to trample past Supervisor Gleason's concerns. I don't know if that addressed his concern or not, but certainly I want us to be very attentive and focused on that as we go forward. Supervisor Couch?
Well, I mean, I'll weigh in and just say I don't see a lot of the icons and the things on the map on the west side in Taft and places like that. I'm sure they have problems in those unincorporated areas. But I think we need to address the problem where the problem is. And so I would be, I don't know how simple or how easy it's going to be for you all to find whatever 1,000 amount of money you just talked about, but I'd be supportive of attempting to do something about that problem, wherever it is.
Supervisor Gleason, would you rather do some more analysis before we?
I need to have a better answer to my question, because I know there was a bicycle death in the Indian Wells Valley within the last 10 years, and if there are no red heat things that are worthy of effort, fine, Andy. If there's nothing happened in the Kern River Valley, then I just need to hear that. I just find it hard to believe that, I want to know that we did a full analysis of those unincorporated areas before I vote in favor of spending any general fund dollars. And if that takes some time and a review, I'm all for that. If you can assure me today that a full analysis of those areas has been done, then I'm going to have a hard time voting in favor of it when I know there was a death. So I won't vote in favor of it.
I would rather us wait to vote on the funding of this process, because it's so important, until each supervisor has been briefed about the specific incidents in their district. So I'm comfortable waiting for that. If Mr. Constantine, you and Mr. Pope, and bring along our guru, Ms. Amarias, we could go through that with each of the supervisors so they know where they are, they know where the problems are, and you can brainstorm about what solutions might be in there for them. So I'm comfortable delaying that and bringing that back at another date. Mr. Alsop.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I just wanted to let you know that this is simply a receive and file report. There's no other action. What we're telling you today is what we know and what we're doing currently, the work we're doing. If your board wants to have us back for an additional meeting or two, that's certainly your prerogative. I just wanted to let you know that this is a receive and file item.
Thank you for the reminder. It is receive and file. So could you, Mr. Constantine, could you and Mr. Pope go through that briefing with each of the supervisors for their specific areas, and then I would urge you to agendize on a subsequent meeting after everybody's done that the question as to whether or not we proceed with funding this and moving forward. Okay. Anybody have a problem with that? Anybody have a problem with that?
Chairman, are we
Perez?
going to receive and file now?
Yes.
Because I can make that motion. Thank you. I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Is there a second to that? And I want to thank Supervisor Perez for partnering with me on trying to make a difference with this.
It's been a good partnership.
Yeah, thank you.
Indeed.
Yeah,
Thank you, guys.
we'll continue doing that. Okay, please cast your votes.
The motion is approved, 4 ayes, 1 absent. Supervisor Scrivener.
Thank you. Thank you very much, staff, for your help with that. Next is item number 43, which is a report from Dominic Brown, who is the interim, do I have that correct? Interim or acting, I'm not sure which it is, Director of Kern County Employment Retirement Association. Mr. Brown, welcome to the dais. Please feel free to proceed.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Don't think your microphone's on, sir.
Board.
There we go. By the way, I'm delighted with the way you've hit the ground running in your effort to lead KCERA, and I was chiding Mr. Brown yesterday. It was his job to come before us before as an auditor who was holding people's feet to the fire and reaching for pennies and nickels that might have been left out or insufficient controls. And I said, Dominic, we didn't realize what a nice, happy, jovial guy you are, because now you have a different role, and it's just nice to see you really embrace it and step forward. So you're doing a great job.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Still challenging, just in a very, very different way. So good morning again, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Dominic Brown. I'm the Acting Executive Director of the Retirement Department, commonly known as KCERA, Kern County Employees Retirement Association. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your kind words. Thank you also, Supervisor Perez, for your very, very kind and even flattering words. I appreciate that very, very much. I hope the balance of this presentation does not make you regret everything that you said. Yes, I know. So the item on the agenda is has to do with contribution rates. And anybody that looks at this agenda can see $235.3 million staring them in the face and say, wow, that's a really big number. That is a significant percentage of the county's general fund. Why is that number such a large number? So that is part of what we're going to talk about. So I have invited our actuaries to join us this morning and to help present some of the KCERA information. But before I turn it over to them, I wanted to make a few general comments about KCERA. So KCERA is a very unique organization. We have 9 voting members. Our board is comprised of general and elected trustees, as well as the treasurer tax collector. So we not only have 7,000 retired members that we serve, but also approximately 9,000 active members and about 1,000 deferred members, which means that they have separated service, but they have not retired. They are in some sort of limbo. So those 10,000 active members are spread across 15 plan sponsors, of which, of course, the county is the largest and is in a cost pool together with the courts and with the hospital authority. The other 12 plan sponsors are in a separate cost pool. So when it comes to contribution rates, KCERA performs more or less a calculator function. At some point in the past, deals were negotiated by employers and employees, and KCERA is now responsible to administer those benefits. So we engage our actuaries to help us do that. It's important to understand that in a perfect world, money is collected over an employee's career, both by employee and employer contributions. And if everything goes perfectly according to plan, there is exactly the right amount of money at the time of their retirement to fund their retirement benefits for the remainder of their lifetime. But there are a number of things that upset that very delicate balance in the real world. So Paul and John are here from Segal. They represent a number of clients throughout California, including the UC Regent and Orange County. Paul has a particular talent for making very, very complicated actuarial principles, not quite so complicated and more consumable. And he loves to be interrupted with questions, so feel free to do that at any point. I encourage you to stay tuned to the end of the presentation. At the end of the presentation, there is some forecasting looking at contribution rates over the next 5 years, which I know has a very significant impact to the county for budgeting purposes. So with that, I'll turn it over to Paul Angelo from the Segal Company.
Okay, Mr. Angelo, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As agendized, Paul Angelo and my colleague John Monroe are here to present the annual actuarial evaluation for KCERA. The slides today, though, we actually have 2 parts, because what we'll see when we look at what happened between last year and this year to change the contribution rates, the most significant one is that the system did what's called an experience analysis and adopted new actuarial assumptions. So we're going to do a little bit of actuarial 101 to set up, how we go through that process. Excuse me. There are 3 things that the actuary does with the retirement system, because there are 3 broad decisions that the board has to make, the retirement board has to make. The one that is not reviewed very often is called funding policy. This is things like how long do you pay off your unfunded liability, what's the mortgage period, if you will. Also things like asset smoothing and cost method. It's also the most obscure part. It's pretty much a set of policies. It was last comprehensively reviewed by the KCERA board in 2012. Then every 3 years, we do what's called an experience study. We look at what has happened in the demographics and the economics of the plan the last 3 years, and a combination of that and forward-looking, we recommend assumptions to the board. Once those assumptions are adopted, as Dominic said, today's actual agendized item is pretty much a big number crunch. As once the benefits are set and the assumptions are set and we have the data, the numbers are an elaborate calculation. And so we always like to tell the board, at the point that we're presenting the actuarial report, it's too late to complain. The time to complain, the time that we have really the hard discussions is when we are setting the assumptions, which we did last year in 2017. This is just a little mnemonic that we use with the boards all the time. C plus I equals B plus C. I actually have this on buttons that we pass out to the board. You know, contributions plus investment income equals benefit payments plus expenses. That sounds like we've sort of oversimplified things. It's actually a little more complicated than that, but we do find it's helpful for the board when you're trying to understand some actuarial thing to stop and ask yourself, okay, whatever this thing is, how does it affect contributions? How does it affect investment income? How does it affect benefits? How does it affect expenses? That won't give you the answer, but it'll help you clarify the moving parts. We also like to stress that, you know, changing the assumptions definitely changes the current year contribution, but that's not really what changes the ultimate cost of the plan. It's the actual experience that really drives the cost of the plan. So we distinguish between the sort of the ultimate cost and the measured cost. So actuarial assumptions, they come in two flavors. Demographic is where we basically are trying to predict the benefit stream for the entire plan for all the current members, how long people are going to live, how long they're going to work, who becomes disabled, who quits, all those kind of assumptions. Then economic assumptions is mainly how the assets grow and also how salaries grow over time because the benefits are based on salaries. So here's a quick snapshot of what the board adopted last year for the new valuation, the valuation that was then done as of July 1, 2017, which then that produces the costs that go into effect July 1, 2018. The economic assumptions, we had price inflation. We lowered that from 3.25 to 3%. I can tell you industry practice is probably to go lower, so we probably haven't seen the last reduction in that assumption. That's a complicated assumption because it then affects other assumptions, which we'll see in a moment. Salary increases, here's an example. Well, if inflation is going down by slower than we thought it was, if we lower that assumption, well, that's a component of salary increases. So salary increases are also now assumed to grow a little bit slower than in the previous set. And we'll show you a chart in a second to see how these pieces fit together. The one that everybody likes to talk about is the expected return. That's the discount rate. We'll go into that in more detail. That was lowered from 7.5% to 7.25%. That's fairly common now within California, although there's still some systems that have even gone to 7% here in California. So that's probably not the last time we've heard of that one either. This little chart just shows how those two, the salary assumption and the expected return or discount rate assumption, fit together. They're both using what's called a building block approach. In the first column here, we start with price inflation, and then we add to that the expected real return. That has a bunch of components too. That gets to the 7.25. And then to make sure the assumptions are consistent, the salary growth also starts with the same price inflation component, now at 3%, and then we add the increase in real wages. That's how fast average wages grow faster than average prices, and that's still a real thing. And we also have individual salary growth that goes into there as well. Now, as I said, the one that everybody wants to talk about is the expected return. It's also called the discount rate. It is really used to determine all of the future, take the future benefits and turn them into a present value today. And so obviously the higher the assumed return, the lower those present values and the lower your measured cost is. So lowering the expected return definitely results in an increase in the current contribution rate. That is really just a matter of timing, right? Ultimately, I like to say at the end here, you can't pay benefits out of assumed earnings, right? Ultimately, it's what the plan really earns that drives the cost of the plan. But the current cost, your employer contribution rates are very sensitive to this. So here's, again, we're not going to go through all these pieces, but just to show you how much we don't just wake up and go, oh, how about 7.25? You know, we actually develop this one component at a time. We look, there's the inflation component. It used to be 3.25, now it's 3. We look at the asset allocation and we look at capital market assumptions for each of the investment categories. That gets us the real return. We take out investment expenses, and then we have a risk adjustment. That's what the actuarial standards call a margin for adverse deviation. We want to be right more than half the time. We find the line we use with our boards is we find that boards have an asymmetrical risk tolerance. What does that mean? That means that when the plan earns more than the assumed rate, that's a good day. The trustees are happy. When the plan earns less than the assumed rate, it's a really bad day. The trustees get a lot more sad when you come in low than they get happy when you come in high. So we try to actually aim at something a little higher than a 50% confidence. So that's all boiled in here. And again, the report that we go through with the board clearly has a lot more detail than what we're seeing here. This trend toward lower assumptions is happening throughout the country and throughout California. California tends to be ahead of the curve in terms of public pension actuarial practice. So if you read in the trades, some big state system just went from 8% to 7.5%. Just read that the other day. California long ago left behind 8% and 7.5%. Right now, all the systems in California are pretty much within 7 and 7.25, with a couple of systems even lower than 7. And key in that is that the inflation component for a lot of systems in California is lower than 3. And just like we saw in the previous slide, I do want to just point this out. If you wanted to have one answer to why did we go from 7.5 down to 7.25, you can see all these other numbers are relatively unchanged. It was lowering the inflation component that actually moved the nominal return down. The reason I bring that up is we probably have not seen the last decrease. 3%, which is what we recommended, is at the high end of the current range. We will be recommending 2.75% going forward. We do these every 3 years. It doesn't mean we have to do an out-of-cycle review, but we're still going to see continued downward pressure on that nominal return, which will then lead to increased contribution rates for employers. So that's the first piece of sort of foreboding future news to tuck away. The next one is on the demographic side. For the demographics, we look at a whole slew of what we call decrements. What's the probability of retiring? What's the probability of quitting or becoming disabled? Well, the one that makes the most difference is the mortality table. People are living longer. And so we now have from the Society of Actuaries what are called mortality improvement scales. And what we did this year, what your board adopted, and this is a big deal, they went to something called generational mortality. It used to be, if you're at a cocktail party and someone finds out you're an actuary and they say, well, what's the probability of me dying? You ask them 2 questions. How old are you and what's your gender? Because the table was only based upon age and sex. Now, with the generational mortality, there's actually a different table for each future year. So now you have to tell me not only how old you are and what your gender is, but what year is it? Because the probability of dying at age 60 in 2018 is not the same as in 2028. We've now built all that into the assumption, and your board adopted that, and that had a material impact on the contribution rates as well. So that was kind of the big new thing. That doesn't happen every time, this shift from what we call a static table to generational mortality. Trying to get the costs in today in order to avoid having the costs creep up going forward, trying to deliver to you, the employers, a level contribution pattern. Okay? So that's the end of the review of the assumptions. Now, the next we have a whole bunch of numbers about the valuation, but I'd like to pause and take any questions or comments just on the actuarial assumptions part of the process.
Colleagues, do you have any questions about this part? Supervisor Perez.
Thank you, Chairman. Do you factor in likely medical advancements and their likelihood to extend life? How do you, in particular, what we are seeing with the advancement of technology to upgrade human beings, if you will, are you thinking along those terms, or is that not yet advanced enough?
Okay, upgrading human beings, I can clearly say no. What we are seeing, and again, this is very much data driven. I was interested to see in your study of the pedestrian deaths and the bicycles and the pedestrians, you use something called a heat map. Well, we invented heat maps. So when the Society of Actuaries looks at trends, yes, when it trends in mortality, they actually look at generation by generation how the probability of death at each age has decreased or increased over time. Now, like any data, it's rough and messy, but there has been a general trend, but I don't think it's the sort of the cyber approach, artificial of parking your basically what you described as the more sort of tech driven, but it is certainly advances in medical technology, primarily related to cardiovascular and strokes. Now, there's a little trend going the other way, right? We see we have the opioid epidemic, we have obesity. We also have the fact that in California, Mortality improvement is somewhat slower than in the rest of the country because the rest of the country still smokes. I mean, that is, there are lifestyle changes that are where California is ahead of the rest of the country. So some of the mortality improvement that we might be seeing outside California, we see has already occurred in California. Now, then you wave a lot of data over that, and what you really look at is just much broader trends. So the projection scales that I mentioned in this slide here, they are very much more result driven. That is, this is what is observed. It doesn't really try to specifically say, oh, somebody, invented a new gene therapy for some particular disease. How is that going to affect these numbers? It is much more macro and global.
That's fascinating. I appreciate your work on heat maps. I've seen presentations on places that are very urban, have a lot of concrete, not a lot of green or access to green space, and the heat maps tend to show the places where you have a lot of body heat, a lot of heat that is bouncing off of your concrete physical environment, and it tends to increase stress hormones, which tend to cause children to be able to, not able to retain information as effectively as a non-stressful environment, as areas on the map that are not heat related. As fascinating correlation between retinol in the body, stress, and comprehension of information. I mean, seems to be we really should be thinking about that in our planning and in the built environment. So I appreciate what you've done. Anyway, I just had an interesting and weird question, a sci-fi question.
And by the way, just for the record, heat map is more of a metaphor. I mean, it's not what you're describing is actual physical heat affecting things. The heat map, sort of like in what you saw on the traffic issues, those are not actually measures of temperature. Heat map is just, when you look at these maps, they have colors and they seem to change and they're red and blue. So it looks like something coming off a radiator, but it's not literally about heat in this case. That's just that is a term of art used to describe a particular way to present data. I didn't want you to think it was actually about, hot concrete.
Well, thank you for pointing out that my statement was ridiculous. Thank you.
Well, no. It's, I mean,
I really tried. I'm trying to learn.
But the fact that what I guess really the takeaway here is we really don't look specifically at causes. It's not that refined a science. It is much more just broadly demographically based. And I apologize if that sounded like I was dismissing your question. Okay.
Mr. Angelo, could you, thank you. I don't mean to cut you off there, Supervisor Perez. Mr. Angelo, could you pause for a moment? Mr. Alsop, did I miss an opportunity for you or your staff to make comment about this? I did not. Okay. No. Mr. Angelo, please proceed.
Very good. So now moving into the actual evaluation. This is the annual report that you would either get from us or from the KCERA staff. We're going to try to just sort of boil down the entire study into a few pages here. We do the evaluation to summarize the data. We look at the last year's experience to see how it affected the future costs. We measure the funded status, the so-called funded ratio, and then the one that everybody is waiting to hear is what are the new funding requirements. This is just a picture of what goes into the evaluation. We talked about the actuarial assumptions there over on the right side, but there's also the member data, the assets, both the level of the assets and the recent rates of return, plan provisions, and then these funding policies, which is things like your amortization periods, how long you're paying off your unfunded liabilities. Here's a quick snapshot of demographics. We are seeing, we do 12 of the county systems around the country, as well as some of the larger city systems. The counties are very similar in California. So we are seeing, after kind of flat active payrolls after the 2008-2009 recession, we are seeing recovery, and just as you see here, the active headcount went from 8,600 to 8,700, so which we did not see in the years 2009, 10, 11. So that's moving in a healthy direction. If we sort of boil the whole valuation down to 2 pages, we start by sort of measuring the liabilities and the assets. We'll have some more details on both of these, but you can see that the unfunded liability that everybody likes to talk about went from about $2.1 billion up to about $2.3 billion. We'll have a chart that shows exactly how that happened, effect by effect. And then the funded position, funded ratio on a smooth value basis is relatively flat, but on a market value basis, it's actually improved from 59% 59% to 62%. I always like to emphasize there is no magic number that the funded ratio should be. There's an urban myth out there that says that something happens at 80%. Nothing happens at 80%. The higher the ratio, the smaller your unfunded, the lower your employer contributions. But the only funded ratios that make a big difference are 100%, which means then you only have to pay each year's cost, and 0%, which means you run out of money. But there's nothing bright line. There's no specific healthy test that you'll see at 80%, which is something that you'll see in the papers sometimes. As far as the contribution rates, we focus here in today's presentation on the county contribution rates because that's who you are, but we also have a whole slew of rates in the report that deal with all the special districts and the other employers. But you can see here, now this is the first time I'm going to mention the phase-in. Okay, what is a phase-in? When we had the change in the contribution rates, that increased the county and the court's cost. The board adopted a policy of phasing in the effect of that contribution rate change over a 3-year period. We don't phase in the assumption itself. We value the liabilities with the new assumptions, but then we look at that particular element of changing cost, and we've recognized 1/3 of that here and another 1/3 each in the next 2 years. So if you look in the actual report, the full report, most of the numbers in the report are before the phase-in, and then there's a letter in the back of the report that goes through how the effect of the assumption change is phased in. So what we're showing here is without the phase-in, the contribution rate for county excluding courts would have gone from about 38.3 up to about 40% of pay even. And then the safety, similar increases from 63.5 up to about 70.6. Again, the actual rates we'll see in a moment are slightly smaller because of the phase-in. Couple of slides here I'll go through a little bit quickly. You know, the investment return, you actually had a very strong market return, 12% compared to the prior assumption of 7.5. But because there were some losses in previous years that we're still recognizing, the rate of return on a 5-year smoothing basis was 7%. So you had a small loss compared to 7.5 on a smooth basis. And again, that's one of those funding policies that the board has adopted.
Mr. Angelo, while you're on that specific topic, could you explain to us a little bit the benefit of smoothing and what the consequence would be if we did not smooth those out, kind of averaging the bad years with some great years like we just had?
Exactly. It's really about managing contribution volatility. You know, anecdotally, we are told by employers like yourselves, you know, what kills us isn't the level of the cost, it's the fact that it changes so much from year to year. So what can you do? We know we want to end up in the same place. We want the benefits to be securely funded, but there's a way that we can filter out the short-term market volatility and focus more in on the underlying rate of growth of the assets. That's all that asset smoothing does. And so, it actually, there's a great graph in the report that shows the rates of return on a market value basis, and it's a roller coaster. You know, plunged down in 2008-9, then it comes back up.
Could you give us those numbers from at least the last 5 years? What is our performance of our plan been for the last 5 years? And while you're looking that up, Mr. Alsop, do you concur that smoothing is a good thing for us to use?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'm going to let Elsa Martinez answer that question.
Good morning, Ms. Martinez.
From a budgetary perspective, it's good for the county. If we were to recognize, if the evaluation was done on the market, we would have significant swings every year that would require cuts, and perhaps those could be avoided because the subsequent year you would have some gains. So budgetarily, it makes sense.
You concur. Thank you very much.
Exactly right.
Mr. Angelo.
Now, you know, the thing about looking at rates of return, there's a parlor game I play with the trustees. The historical rate of return depends critically on what period of time you look at. And the market has been so volatile recently, if you tell me your favorite number between 1 and 10, I can find you a period of years where that was your average return. So people tend to cherry pick, you know, to find the periods that look good or look bad. What we show in our report is a 5 and a 10-year average. And on a market value basis, the 5-year average is 7.7. But on a smooth basis, the 5-year average is 6.3. because prior to the most recent 5 years, you had the losses after 2008. On a 10-year basis, now again, the 10-year basis still includes the extraordinary market downturn in 2008-9. I'm looking at a chart here. It's actually a 9-year return. We show 9 years because that's when we became your actuary. That's how far back we have the data. So the 9-year return, shows 5.3 on a market value basis. That number is going to look a lot better next year, only because if it were still a 9-year return, the 2008 downturn, we had a negative 25% return in 8-9. You and every other plan in California. So that's one reason why, again, look at the 9-year average, seems artificially low. The smooth return over that same period is 6.3. It's a little hard for me to convey the effect of smoothing with just those averages, but again, if you have the luxury of looking at the actuarial report, you'll see a graph that actually shows, graphically both the market returns and the smooth returns. What you can see is they follow very much the same contours. We are not hiding or masking the actual market returns. It just takes some of the highs and lows, gives them a chance to average out. And as your staff mentioned, it simply produces a more stable series of costs for you to budget against.
Yeah, your report was 202 pages. It took a long time
Yeah,
to go through
you have to
202,
find the good pages.
particularly of actuarial reports. Okay, I'm sorry, sir. Go proceed.
Thank you. So here we have the actuarial valuation, the change in assumptions. We took the impact on the unfunded liability and phased that in over a 3-year period. This was done only for the county general, the courts, and safety. We did not phase in the rates for the special districts. Some of that just involves, what level of involvement between the employers and the retirement board. Let's go to the next one here. Still talking about experience. This is just showing the 2 columns I showed you. This sort of highlights the changes in the funded ratio and the employer contribution rates. It's redundant to the earlier slide, so I'm going to jump to this one. Now, I know this is small print. It's page 63 of the full report. It's probably the page that we spend the most time with the board when we present the valuation. Because what this shows is that at the last year, $2,127,000,000 was your unfunded liability. If everything had happened according to plan, if all the assumptions had come true, the unfunded would have come down slightly to $2,124,000,000. But things never go according to plan. So what you'll find interesting in what is below there in the with the letters indented there, these are all the places where the assumptions didn't come true. Remember I mentioned that you earned 7% in a smooth basis instead of 7.5. How does that translate into additional unfunded liability? Well, $17.7 million. You actually had a gain on salaries. Salaries grew slower than assumed. Your liability went down by $50 million just for that event. You paid lower than expected COLAs because cost of living has been lower than the maximum 3% that your tiers could pay. That's a $21.5 million. If you actually add up all those gain-loss items, it's a $60 million gain. Your actual experience was more favorable than the assumptions to the tune of $60 million on your unfunded liability. Well, then why did the unfunded go up? It's because of the assumption changes. Taken together, the assumption changes, primarily the lower expected return and the longer life expectancies, those together increased the unfunded liability by about $213 million. So you net those together, that's how we get to the $2,278,000,000. So here you can really see on one page all the things that happened to the plan that affected the unfunded liability. We're going to see a similar page 2 slides in, which has the same detail on the contribution rate. I won't go through it in detail, but we also show the board how each of these experience events affects the employer contribution rates. Just a quick mention of your amortization policy. You are paying off each new year. When we have a new gain or loss or an assumption change, it's identified and funded over a separate 18-year period. That's what was adopted by the board 2012. Here we have even a smaller font that shows the change in the contribution rates. Again, the same items we saw before, but now they're translated into the effect on the aggregate employer contribution rates. But all the same items that we saw before appear here. So we're going to close with a forecast of contribution rates. We have two slides, one for the county general members and one for the county safety members, both excluding courts. The second line here is the rate that gets adopted today, the 38.21. That is after the phase-in. So what you'll see here is that over the next 6 years, that will increase to 41.3. It's kind of interesting to see it goes up for 3 years, 38.2, 39.4, 41.2, and 41.7. That's the phase-in of the contribution rate changes coming in. And then it goes down a little bit, 41.7, 41.5, 41 1/3. That is actually the new tiers, under California's pension reform, what's called CalPEPRA, there are tiers which are less generous benefits, and that's what new employees starting 2013, what they go into. Well, as those lower cost, lower benefit folks replace the legacy tiers, that gradually makes the cost go down. That's what you're seeing in those last 3 years. That's the effect of the new CalPEPRA tiers. We see exactly the same pattern for safety here. It's 67.29. That's the rate that will be adopted today. It's going to go up for 3 years because of the phase-in. Then again, gradually 73.7, 73 1/4, 73 even. That's the new lower cost PEPRA tier working its way into your active members. And that is our prepared remarks, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions from the board before we transition back, I think, to Mr. Brown? Mr. Brown.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, one thing I would like to add, just following up on that last bit that Paul has said, the county in 2007 put in the Tier 2 structure. So when PREPA was brought in 2013, every plan had to do analysis to see if their tier that was in effect at that date was higher or lower than PEPRA. So many plans had to scramble a little bit and put together a new tier that was PEPRA compliant. Tier 2 was already PEPRA compliant. Tier 2 is actually lower than what PEPRA allows. So what we are beginning to see as we forecast out over these next few years is the beginning of the effect of Tier 2. And the reason why is because people cannot retire until they have at least 10 years of eligible membership. So given that it is now 2018, we are at the very beginning of Tier 2 people becoming eligible to retire, so that number will begin to grow over time, the number of Tier 2 retirements, which will start to bring down the contribution rates over time.
Right. And we also see here not only the effect of the retirements, but even the active members. There's a thing called the normal cost. That's the cost for each new year of service. The Tier 2 active members have a lower normal cost than the legacy tiers. So even before they retire, we see some of the cost impact coming in here. But as Dominic says, that will become even more apparent in the costs once those members start to retire.
I'd like to ask a question, Mr. Brown, about that's worded a little bit differently, and that is, when we changed the retirement, we added a new retirement tier that was 1.62 at 60 instead of 3 at 60, which is the lowest allowable one, that's the lowest rate we can do in the state of California, as I understand it. We were presented with a graph back then that plotted the future consequence of that, and it goes along flat for a few years, largely because of the 10-year vesting schedule that we have. It goes along flat for a few years, but then it begins to accelerate 10, 12, 13 years out, and eventually makes a marked difference in the amount of what our pension obligation will be someday. Are we progressing as we thought we would as a result of that decision to modify the retirement benefit?
Mr. Chairman, I've not seen that particular schedule. I'm sure I can track it down somewhere. Given everything I know about the plan, I see no reason that everything shouldn't be functioning exactly as anticipated in the years to come.
That's my understanding. Mr. Alsop? Ms. Martinez?
Mr. Chairman, I think I have to give you a few reminders and for the benefit of the public. The normal cost of our Tier 1, which is our 3% at 60 for general members, our contribution for that is 19.58% of salaries. Our Tier 2, 1.62 at 65, is only 6.91% for normal costs. However, as a reminder, we offer those employees an additional 6% premium pay that if they set up in our 457 plan, we match it an additional 6%. So in essence, our normal cost for those employees that do put their money in deferred comp is about 18.91% compared to our 19.58% for Tier 1. The benefit of that plan, and I think we're going to see that coming in the future, I'm not familiar with that graph. We'll be happy to go back and review it and work with KCERA to see if we're making progress. But the benefit of that Tier 2 plan is the unfunded liability. The unfunded liability for that plan, even though it's distributed equally among the plans, the goal is that because they're receiving a lower benefit, we're going to see that unfunded liability being reduced. Right now, we are paying approximately for general members 26.93% of salary towards the unfunded liability. So that's where we're going to see, hopefully, at some point, a reduction. Our normal cost is pretty similar between the 19.58 and the 18.91 once we consider the premium pay and the match.
Very good. Thank you. Were we back to Mr. Brown? Or does that conclude your presentation?
Our presentation is complete. We'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Very good. Supervisor Perez.
Thank you. Briefly, I meant to mention earlier, we talked yesterday about getting myself and my staff together for a seminar, if you will, on basics and making sure we're all on the same page and understanding the issue. And so I certainly want to extend that to the staff of my colleagues, that if you're interested in sending your staff to such a seminar to get the ball rolling, certainly we can coordinate. But I want to get started with my staff, and of course, my colleagues know now that we can do that together. So thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor
That's
Perez.
it, thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, the county is already supporting a program that is largely run through deferred compensation with the treasurer tax collector. One of those seminars that is already allowed by county employees to be attended twice a year, I believe. One of them in particular, KCERA participates in, and it is kind of a joint presentation between deferred comp and KCERA. And for Tier 2 employees in particular, it is especially important that they understand their benefits, because 1.62 at 65 will likely not be enough to carry them through their retirement unless they do take advantage in some way of the 6% and get that match and put that money to work for them. But many employees do not really understand how to invest and what they need to do and what the opportunities are and how to take advantage of that best. So that is something that county employees already do have available to them, but we're happy to look for additional ways that we can supplement their education in order to control their own destinies, so to speak. We as KCERA have just the defined benefit portion. The defined compensation portion is actually separate. It's important that employees understand how those two things work in concert together.
It is. Thank you. Are there any members of the public that would like to make comment about the report we've just received? I don't see anyone, so we'll return to the board for comment and action. The recommended action is that at the end of our conversation, if we are so inclined, that we've been requested to consider the adoption of the contribution rates. Correct? Correct. So, Mr. Alsop, did you have a comment?
Mr. Chairman, yes. We'd like to just make a couple of statements at the end here. I'd like to have Ms. Martinez from my office talk a little bit about the nexus, a little bit more specifically of all of this to our budget going forward.
Ms. Martinez?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We just want to close with a little bit more granular detail of what the impacts are on the budget. As the contribution, as you notice, are going down for general members, the contributions for safety employees are going up significantly. We anticipate, based on our current salaries, that we will see an increase of approximately $3.3 million cost in the general fund, and most of it will come from our safety departments, sheriff, probation, and DA. In addition, our fire department will probably see approximately a $2 million increase in the retirement costs. This is only the portion of KCERA. In addition, we have our pension obligation bonds that will continue to grow for the next 4 years until the 1995 POB matures. So it's going to become challenging. Your board was very proactive last year and set up approximately an additional $21 million of our carry forward to help departments mitigate the increase. We will be bringing to your board the guidelines in the next few weeks for the next fiscal year, and you will see how the increase in retirement will impact every single department.
Thank you. Could you give us, Ms. Martinez, a breakdown of what the debt service is on those two pension obligation bonds and when they end?
Certainly. Our fiscal year 17-18 pension obligation bonds was approximately $6.8 million. We will see an increase of approximately $2 million for 18-19, and then the following 2 years, we'll see an additional increase of 4.5 and $5 million. Once we get to fiscal year 21-22, we'll see a reduction of $18 million as our 1995 POB will be mature. The following year, our 22-23 fiscal year, will see an additional 26.7 reduction for a total of 44.7. We have to be cautious, though, because any increases in retirement through KCERA will offset any of those reductions. Following that year, we'll see just a steady increase of approximately $1 million for the next 5 years, and our final payment in our 2008 POB will be 27-28, fiscal year 27-28.
So the first one falls off when, and the second one falls off in 27-28?
The first one will fall off in fiscal year 21-22, so we have an additional 4 years of payments.
Okay, thank you. I know a couple of us were thinking about that. Any other comments by CEO's office or Ms. Martinez?
No, Supervisor Baker.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, do you have any questions? The recommended action is for us to adopt the contribution rates.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Please cast your votes.
The motion is approved, 4 ayes, 1 absent. Supervisor Scrivener.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to the end of this morning's agenda. We will reconvene this afternoon at 2 o'clock. I have asked Matt Constantine to come to us at 2 o'clock at our 2 o'clock session and discuss with us an update on the flu epidemic that we're experiencing and what we might be able to tell our members of our community to do to protect themselves from the now deadly danger that poses. So Mr. Constantine will be back with us at 2 o'clock. So is there a motion that we adjourn to closed session? Thank you. Supervisor Gleason. Without objection, so ordered.